Today was a fun conversation with Ian Perry and Chris Gerritz. We took on the task of doing an in-person version of Thinkers and Drinkers. During the interview, we drank 3 ciders, 1 beer, and a bottle and a half of whiskey, so we took this task seriously. We discussed the format for their group, why it works, the rules, but we also decided to take on 2 topics as a test. We first discussed if the internet is inherently good, and then we took on abortion. It was a complicated and interesting discussion that I think we handled well while inebriated. And don't worry, I got them an Uber home afterward. So with that, say a prayer for our livers, and please enjoy this drunken adventure with Ian Perry and Chris Gerritz. First of all, welcome again to the show. It's the second time here.
Yeah, thank you.
And your first time.
First time.
First time, best time.
Mm-hmm.
I did some analysis. I went back, and you are ex-Air Force.
Correct.
You are ex-Air Force.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to have to look this up now. But so I've had 4 Air Force guys on. You don't count twice because you're just one person.
Well, last time I was here, I didn't have hair, so that's another person.
He's a whole new guy.
Well, that's kind of true.
It's a different guy.
Hardly recognize you. I've had 4 Navy as well, so you guys are all tied up now. 2 Army and 1 Marine. So Marines, they got to get with it. I don't know what's going on with those guys.
They're not big talkers, you know.
Technically, now you've had a Space Force. So I did 18 in the Air Force, and the last 2 were Space Force.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
You're the first.
I went to one of the first retirements in the Space Force for him, and he got to create his own traditions.
Yeah, it was a roast.
Oh, my God.
I literally just had, I think there were 7 or 8 friends of mine from throughout my career that showed up, and their whole job was to roast me. It was actually really, like, some of those folks were actually way better at, like, comedy.
Yeah.
Like, their candor, their cadence was just, like, amazing, and they were on it. It was exactly what I wanted. Like, they took the piss right out of me.
I very much like sending, like, hilarious Space Force memes to people. So now I know where to send them.
There it is. I'm here.
All aliens, obviously. You know.
Sure.
Well, actually, since I have you here, what was it like being there? Was it comedy or was it serious?
Well, I mean,
because it's
all jokes aside, like, it was basically everything that was Air Force Space Command just moved over and became a new branch. And so other than that upper echelon layer of kind of strategic management, it was just Air Force Space Command with different colored name tapes.
Okay. So still great food then.
For sure. Yeah. Nothing changed. I still stayed at the
Marriott. Come on.
It's just goop.
Come on. All right. So we're here to talk about Thinkers and Drinkers. Mm-hmm. Before I get started on that, is it Thinkers and Drinkers, or is it drink and then think, or is it think?
Depends on the event, but formality. But it's Thinkers and Drinkers is the name.
I mean, but like cadence-wise, do people like drink and then you start talking, or they kind of like get their first drink and then they're talking? Like how drunk are you?
It's pretty casual, and so the start of the conversation is pretty much nobody has any alcohol in them, and then the end of the conversation they have some, and so the topic gets a little bit deeper, and we move the conversation to better places once they've had a little bit of lubrication.
I see. Yeah. Okay. So we're going to be doing this together, but we're all starting to drink now. And I think we've decided we'll try to start in about an hour-ish, give or take, depending on the conversation takes us. But so we will be somewhat lubricated by the time we start.
Yeah.
So
it's always better. Yeah.
It's better. Okay. Yeah. So this does happen occasionally.
Yeah. But usually people, when people first get there, they're a little bit, they don't know people, they don't know what's going on, especially if they haven't been there before. And so the icebreakers and getting a little bit of liquid in them, and we make the early part of the topics a little bit easier.
Do they show up early and just power some down? And
yeah, well, so I mean, the way I structure it was that like I'll say it starts at 6:30. That's what we post on the Meetup app. Is you show up at 6:30. Now the only people that actually show up at 6:30 are the brand new people, but that gives me an opportunity to meet them, introduce myself, say hi, this is kind of what we're about, show them where the bar is, and they can get a couple drinks in them or hang out or whatever they want to do. Whereas all the veterans who have been there for a long time, they know that it starts at 7 for real.
Gotcha.
And so they'll show up at 6:58. But I also have folks that show up that don't drink at all. I've had people reach out to me, through the app and be like, hey, do I have to drink? No. Right. I think there are some people who need that kind of social comfort of I have something in my hand, whether it's just the physical manifestation of that or if it's the actual alcohol. They need kind of that social proofing to actually get into the conversation. But I'd say probably 30% of the folks that show up, at least in Denver, don't drink at all. They'll drink soda or water or whatever. That kind of stuff.
I think every region's a little bit different depending on their culture. You know, San Antonio was a heavy drinking culture when we were there, and we still have a group there. But like Austin, you know, most of the folks do drink, and so we'll get there at 7 and Austin time.
It seems like it's kind of like it's thinkers and drinkers. You should probably drink, but
it does help. Also, I like to pitch the fact that we're getting the space from a bar or a venue,
right,
and to at least purchase something from them,
right? Sure,
you know?
Yeah.
And so don't come here and just drink water and take up space, and you know, because we're not charging for it, and you know, a bar has to make a living, and if I want to make sure there's seats for 24 people. The bar wants to know that we're not just taking up space.
It needs to be mutually beneficial.
I often pitch, hey, just, you know, if you're not going to drink at all, get some fries or, you know, support the bar at some point.
Right. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay. So how did you guys get involved in Discourse at all? Like when you were very first starting thinking about this problem, like you can't have just jumped to this. Like what made you start thinking once upon a time, I need to talk about stuff with people. Like how did that all start?
I think I like to joke, and Ian keeps on continuing my joke that
Correct.
He did it to meet girls,
which is true. I mean, there's nothing untrue about that.
Which not a great strategy to have like good political conversations to try to meet girls.
But I'm also forthright about it with the group. I'm like, this started for nefarious reasons. So really kind of for me, the part of it was, you know, we had this this urge to want to go out and have a real conversation with people. Like we had both been in the military, so moving every 4 years doesn't give you a whole lot of opportunity to build what we call like super deep connections because you just don't have the time. And so by the time you kind of get through the BS and actually make real friends, you're moving. And so for me, it was more about, okay, that plus also women. I want to be able to surround myself with smart people who have meaningful conversations. And we would go out to, so like, I mean, I think Texas does a good job of this. Like you have a lot of these kind of like trendy bars and it's like a coffee shop, but it serves, you know, high-end liquor and you can, you know, it turns into like a cocktail bar after night. We would go to places like that because interesting people should be there. Right. And we'd try to, like, we would literally sit down and we would make it a conscientious effort to go out and sit down
next to attractive women, obviously,
or whoever was there, preferably the
Anybody that was
former,
interesting.
But
how
we would
lecherous were you exactly?
And we would sit down next to folks and you know, we would just hit them with a question. You know, we'd start with kind of the warm up, small talk or whatever, like how you know, local or whatever. But then, you know, hey, like, you know, how do you define success? Like, what does success look like to you? And
we would just ask a random table, and then if they were like keen to answer the question, we'd just join them.
Yeah.
So when it was just like 3 of us, it was literally us going to a bar, asking a bunch of random ass questions and provocative questions to people at the bar, and seeing if they were amiable to having a discussion with randoms. And
Okay,
if they did,
so this wasn't structured at all.
This is when we
originally.
first started.
Okay,
So it was just like 3 of us, 4 of us. It was like, hey, we're going to have a drink on Thursday, and we're going to talk about this.
Yeah.
And like for me, you know, it wasn't girls for me necessarily. It was the fact that, you know, we both had turned, you know, we're close to the same age, a year older. But, you know, turning 30, you don't want to go to a bar that you can't hear each other anymore. And so that got really annoying for me. You know, we'd go to a bar, go out with friends, and we'd be somewhere where I have to yell into your ear to hear. And so I just got to that point where I'm like, I guess I'm old now. I want to go to a bar I can hear people and have a conversation. You know, so that was part of it for me.
I think I was born old in that case because I've always preferred bars you can hear people talk.
Yeah.
It's very hard to find in Austin.
Yeah.
And I
Austin
think
loves their loud music.
Yeah, I mean I think the UK does better. You go to pubs and it's like all locals and you have a conversation and there's no music. You're just sitting there. But yeah,
I remember when I was coming up, I really liked lounges. You know, there was kind of like high-end lounges that were like kind of slow techno music, you know, or house music or whatever, but it's turned way down.
It's like lounge music.
But it's more on the house side, but there was a very poorly lit, which I liked, you know, kind of big flat seats, and you could just talk. You could have these really long conversations and there'd be like 5 people in there.
Yeah. Because we were both stationed overseas. So I was in Germany, he was in the UK. And so we got a chance to go to, you know, that bar experience where, they had places we could sit down and talk and order a beer and actually hear the bartender. He doesn't just hate us and move on.
Yeah. But we would go to these places, which are supposed to have interesting people in them, and we'd try to have those conversations. And a lot of times it would just fail to launch. It was just, they didn't want to go there, whether it was, overwhelming to have a random person sit down and ask a real question. But I'd say, we could count on one hand the amount of people that were like, oh yeah, I'm going to meet you there now. And so I think for me, it was like, well, I feel like I really need that. And so how do I facilitate that? I was going to a running group in San Antonio, and they posted everything through the Meetup app. And I was like, well, why don't we try posting this on Meetup and just see if random people show up?
Now, you didn't ask me. 9 people showed up, and I said, what the hell? And he said, well, I put it on the internet.
Yeah, that's
and
also
so
true.
that kind of started the growth process from like 3 to 4 to, we were pulling in randoms, and then 9 people showed up, and then 20 people were showing up, and it just became this monster. And this was all in San Antonio when we started it back in like 2013.
So how'd you guys meet originally?
We met on Grindr. Have you heard of it?
Yeah. Okay.
Just kidding.
I'm so proud of you guys.
we
Look at us now.
Yeah. We actually met 20 years ago?
Yeah, 2004 in Kuwait.
Kuwait.
We were both deployed there.
Yep.
So, okay, you both said you needed to talk about stuff, but why?
Well, my perspective is that's what's missing from society, right? So I feel like as we have become more of an agnostic society and religion doesn't become that backbone, and after you leave college, like, do you hang out with people from work? We're doing a bunch of work remotely now, so you don't have that community. And so that's what I was missing. And I was like, how do I build that, right? I was a drill instructor at Lackland Air Force Base. I can't hang out with people I work with. Number one, they're not very interesting overall, or they're trainees, and I'm not allowed to hang out with them anyway, which you wouldn't want to. But
I think for me, I was always having those conversations online, so it was always on Facebook. And even though I could, I had a legendary Facebook comment trees on, big topics.
I actually really like watching your stuff on Facebook.
Yeah, I kind of stopped because it just got so nasty. And so part of Thinkers and Drinkers was I want to go to a real place where I can see the person I'm talking to, and it's not just the person behind a mask who gets to be a jerk and not assume that I'm a real human, And also there's consequences to what you say. Like if you're gonna start calling people out, like
and just beat them up.
When I'm in person, there's always the threat of that. I'm not saying I'm gonna do that. There's always the threat of a punch if you say something like the people say on Twitter.
Yeah. This I don't know. This kind of sounds crazy to me, like the way things used to be.
Yeah.
Before the internet, that's exactly how people talked. They just got together and they talked.
Mm-hmm.
Like, how else were you going to do it? I mean, maybe phone. Maybe you call them up, but
that's the weird thing. Why is it so novel? Because the world has changed, and now we're just doing what we used to do. Let's do something novel. Let's get together and talk in person. And everyone's like, that's a good idea. Thank you for facilitating.
This reminds me of this Facebook group. It's like Silicon Valley reinvented the car again, I think is the name of the Facebook feed. But it's sort of like everything is like, we added all this high tech stuff to do something we used to do like all the time, drive cars or whatever. This kind of reminds me of that. It's like, wow, we did a lot of work to get back to where we were.
Right.
It's kind of shitty. But so where do you see the problems arising if we don't have these conversations? I mean, you guys are facilitating them.
Yep. Well, I think, backing up the conversations that we're having, because we really haven't defined that, we do rotate between fun topics like dating and things that we, just encounter in our life. We do deep topics like define success and let's talk about, love and life and death and all those things. Those are the deep topics. And then we have the controversial topics or the topics of today that, people are talking about in the global sphere. And we do rotate between those. The incentive is that we still want this to be fun and not, scare people away. When we do have the controversial topic or the needed deep topics or whatever, we want people to have rapport already and not think like this is all you're going to find when you come here. And that's been a model that kind of grew organically because we wanted to keep going, and we've been going to these for 9+ years. And there's a reason for that, because it isn't just a draining controversial conversation every time. It's fun too.
Yeah, and that was, that's the design. The name Thinkers and Drinkers, to me, was very deliberate. For a while in San Antonio, I switched it again because he was like just along for the ride when I started I'm just going to post this on the internet. And he's like, who are these random people that keep showing up like to our like friend group? And I'm like, I don't know. But for a while I called it San Antonio Storytellers, and just the difference in the people that showed up to that when it was called that, I think I only let that happen for like a month or so. It was people that really loved the sound of their own voice. Like they probably have one of these mics and headphones at the house just to listen to themselves talk into it.
Monologues.
Yeah. And that was who showed up when you call it San Antonio Storytellers. Versus Thinkers and Drinkers, there's a mixture of like, okay, Thinkers is first. Like that's by design. That's who we want, is we want kind of rational, thought-provoking people. But Drinkers, like we don't want you to be too serious.
Yeah, not
like,
pinkies up.
Yeah. I don't need you if you're a RIP professor of history, you know, and have mahogany books in a podcast room. I'm just kidding.
Encyclopedia of philosophy back here.
I will say that none of these books are made of mahogany. They're all
Okay,
real, genuine.
Leather bound. Yeah. So for me, it was really intentional. How do you draw the right crowd? Because I think it is important, right? No one wants to come back if it's too stiff and too stuffy. But then also no one wants to come back, the people that I want to be there, if it's just super wild and also unstructured and just kind of just going to show up and drink.
Out of curiosity, did you get anybody who just really wanted to hear stories show up?
Yeah.
So they just
We have listeners.
Didn't want to talk at all. Just like, oh, this is story time, and I get to hear stuff.
For sure.
We learned some facilitation tactics to make those people talk. You know, it's like, we haven't heard from you, Robert.
Sounds so aggressive.
Is that
You feel talk?
targeted?
Show me your papers.
So have you? I'm sure it must have happened at some point. Do you ever get to the point where people become truly uncivil to one another during these conversations?
We've had to kick people out.
Really?
Yeah, it's been rarer than I thought
Very
it would
rare.
be.
Yeah. I'd say for me, so I've done 3 regions. So I started San Antonio, I started Stuttgart, and I started Denver. And across those 3 regions over 9 years, maybe 6 people total. One of those was an ex who decided to date my best friend. So that was unrelated to the...
Yeah, I think most of the drama actually happens from people dating in the group, which is it's a good story and a bad story, because I've been to 4 or 5 weddings that people that met at the meetup.
Yeah.
So they invite us and they're like, "Hey, Chris, you made this happen." I'm like, "I don't know if I made that happen, but
Wasn't in the room.
yeah."
The rules are they have to name their first child. It has to be Chris or Ian. Chris is kind of a,
Could go either way.
it could go both ways.
Yeah,
So
yeah. Christine, yeah. So do you have some sort of like postmortem when that does happen? Like, how did it get to that level of uncivility? Like, how do you handle that?
Yeah, and that's actually kind of why we got to a point over the course of this. This started as just a simple meetup. It started as a casual thing that we were doing, and as it grew, it became more and more. And then every time we approached a scenario where, like, how do we deal with the belligerent person who just wants to spout propaganda? How do we deal with the person who just wants to prey on, people there to get a date? Like, we started having to deal with those things. Exactly.
you have to do it in a very awesome way, like I would. Be very low key about it.
So we just, over time, we just started cataloging ways of dealing with this. And we had, as we branched out into multiple regions, we would have regional organizer meetings, and we'd come together and travel together and talk about all the challenges we've had. How do we deal with that? How do we deal with people that use logical fallacies? How do we deal with people who, come in and just demand mic time and steal time? And so we started developing rules, and they were very informal at first. But I'll, as we progress in this conversation, I'll talk about how we've formalized certain rules to be like, okay, if it's a controversial topic, we need to be more explicit with our rules. And I know we print them and tell them, hey guys, everybody speaks. There's no fighting here, and no monologuing. If we have a 20-minute round and there's 8 people, and if someone takes 4 minutes to take his point, someone's not talking anymore. So the everybody speaks, everybody gets a chance to speak rule is broken now. You're breaking a rule by monologuing and dominating the conversation.
Out of curiosity, since you mentioned logical fallacies, this is something I spend quite a bit of time thinking about, specifically one in particular logical fallacy, which is the appeal to authority. So it's like, I'm a computer hacker. I've been in computer security for 28 years, comma. Now I have something to say that would be useful, but it's much more impactful having said the previous, and here's some, Now, I realize it's an appeal to authority. I understand that that's actually a logical fallacy, but I also find it sometimes extremely useful to have some context for why they're coming from whatever position they're coming from. Mm-hmm. I'm going to take it on face value based on the data and my knowledge and what's going on, but I'm going to put a lot less credence on it if they're just some schmo. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like if they're, I'm a PhD, 30 years in ER, and here's how this actually happens in real life. I'm like, probably knows more about this topic than, Joe over here who just showed up,
But I think that's part of the group. How we run it is we don't require people to have a background in whatever, you can show up and have an opinion on whatever it is we're talking about. Mm-hmm. And so I've always found it interesting when people have that pre-qualifier, like as a blank, and then that's how they start their sentence. It's like, from my perspective, and I know other people kind of recognize that as like, okay, now I understand the context. But for me, the way that I want to look at things is it does not require you to have some kind of a background to have an opinion on a thing. Mm-hmm. And I would often kind of call people out. I would say, you said as a blank, and that was how you started. Why do you think that's necessary to convince me of your opinion? Mm-hmm. Right. And that was always something that I try to build into the conversations.
So to answer that question, and the only times I've seen it used well is when it's a difficult thing to quantify, but given a vast amount of experience, this person or me or whatever we're talking about, whoever's saying it, has so much information that it would take a long time to explain all of why I am right.
Right.
And so you're like, just trust me on this one thing, and here's why you need to trust me. If you don't trust me, I'll give you like 50 books to go read, and then you'll be caught up. But like, it's kind of useful sometimes.
Yeah, it is, and it actually, anybody who is an expert does add value to the group when they bring that up. If we're talking about some like deep topic, like like death or something like that, and one of the people in there is literally a psychologist, we'd be like, hey, from your professional opinion, like what do you think about this? And they're like, well, in my profession we do X. That adds value. But there's another thing to this, and that it actually dispels the entire question of everyone trying to appeal to authority and being right in the conversation, is that's not the intent of the group, is not to be right. Because, so for instance, if I pick a topic like crypto or blockchain, more than likely I'm going to get some crypto bros that know a lot about it. I'm going to get some people that don't use it at all. And I'm going to have to try to facilitate a conversation between the two groups. And it's going to end up being very dominant with the people who are crypto bros.
Yeah.
And so instead, I frame the conversation in a way that everyone has an opinion. Hey, how do you think, your life would change as a flower shop owner, if your money stopped being physical? Like, how do you feel about that? Does that have fear? Is it fear?
Yeah, that's compelling. What I always worry about in mass conversations is you'll have, let's say 10 people there, 9 people know nothing about the topic and they're just showing up totally uninformed. And one person is an expert in whatever we're talking about, astrophysics or something, like they really know what they're doing. And then like all these people are saying some random stuff. The only person there who has an informed decision at all on whether this thing is good or bad is kind of, I wouldn't say turned into a minority, but they're turned into, such a non-consequential part of the conversation that it ends up not being very productive or maybe even counterproductive as opposed to the one expert just saying whatever is true about the thing.
Yeah. And I think that comes back to what is the goal of the conversation. If we're going to have a conversation about a controversial topic, our goal isn't to come around a kitchen table and decide the fate of the state, of the country. Like, we're just a bunch of random schmucks drinking at a bar. We're not going to change the world here. We're just having a conversation, and we want to have that conversation. So, if we leave here knowing a little bit about the perspectives of other people in my community, then I win. I don't have to convince you, and I don't have to win the argument.
Yeah. There's a difference between winning and just actually getting the data, right? It's like, oh, this person actually knows a ton. Like, it would be, if we just let this person monologue for an hour, we would all be way smarter about this topic. Clearly, that's not a good conversation, but it would have been pushing 9/10 of the people forward, and as opposed to, potentially going backwards, depending on how bad the conversation goes. This is one of the reasons I prefer these kinds of conversations where I have an expert. You guys are an expert in facilitating conversations. That's great. as opposed to 20 people in a room kind of just going at it, because then someone's like, no, the best way to do it is blah, 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 blah.
And so I would say another layer to this, because there's certainly a lot of those folks. And that's if there has been a resounding kind of audit of what is wrong with the group, is that like people show up expecting it, like we're going to talk about the education system in America, and everybody comes with some kind of background or some kind of
opinion,
rigor that's gone into figuring out what the stats are and all that kind of data stuff. But to my thoughts would be, sure, that's not what the intention of the group is to get, it's not a speaker series. It's more like just come and have a conversation with people about topics that are more meaningful than where you are, where you're from, and how long you've been doing your job. For me, it's the part of it that I think is interesting is even when we say an expert in, so if we're using an education system as the thing, someone who has been a professor for X amount of years would be what we would call an expert in that field.
Sure.
But everybody has anecdotal experiences about what their education was like. And I think that part is what I'm trying to glean out of that conversation is, okay, so you went to school in Syria and then your school was bombed and now you're in Germany. What is that like, and what is the difference between those places, and what did you learn from it? That's more, I think, the objective of the group is to see that anecdotal experience across a much more diverse group of people than you would have met just walking around in the street. I think that's always
there are other meetups and other groups that do it differently. There are intellectual groups where it's like, I want you to come prepared.
Yeah.
My group, no. Like
no homework.
No homework.
Why do you prefer the no homework?
It's no homework required.
It brings funner people too.
And you can just show up.
I'll tell you what, if you have homework, the people that show up, you're like, all right. Yeah. I mean, I think people in this room aside, right, it takes a lot of effort to be an expert in anything, right? And I think I'm much more of a generalist personally, but there are certainly things that I have a lot of experience in, but I find it really stuffy to show up to something and everybody has to have some kind of there's like an audit of what you've done and who has given you permission to speak,
Yeah. I often get messages from people who are first hearing about the group, and they'll message me and say, I'm just a nurse and I have kids. I'm not really an intellectual. And I'm like, you're going to fit right in.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to fumble this question a little bit, but hopefully you understand what I'm asking as I'm asking it. So generally speaking, you have an Overton window, like this is the socially acceptable whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Do you find that people want to expand that and that is why they're showing up? Or do you find that they end up collapsing back into either, the same window that's always been there or even a narrower window? Like
acceptable thoughts, acceptable topics.
Mm-hmm.
I think the first, I think people are there to open. What I find interesting, and I don't know how much work you do as far as figuring out your demographics, but I do think it's interesting to look at, okay, so how many single people here, how many married people here, how many people that are religious, how many people of various ethnic backgrounds. So I find that we're pretty diverse across everything, and we don't do any tuning to that, but I think it's interesting, people that find the group, show up to the group, and actually continue to come to the group tend not to be religious, tend to be atheist agnostic, tend to be single for the most part, at least specifically in Denver where I'm at. I think that's a pretty good cut of the population at large anyway. But I always wondered why that was, because I've done that in 3 cities. I think San Antonio is a much more religious city than probably a Denver is. But I've always wondered why that would be, and I think it's because people who already have answers aren't seeking more. And I think that's why people come to the group, is they want to learn from others and they want to know answers to questions that we probably all have.
And there's a tone of neutrality with this group. We're not here to be a partisan hack and throw, we need to convince everyone about immigration. No, we're trying to think let's talk about that in a neutral, put it on the table, or let's not create sides. Let's talk about this thing. And now we can talk about it in a way that doesn't require us to beat each other up over it. And also,
I'm somewhat surprised you don't do your own homework. You specifically, knowing you. I mean, I don't know about your background, but I've seen your posts, for instance, and I wouldn't say they're all perfectly thought out, but there's certainly a lot of thought that went into them. So you just walk in just blind?
Well, I as a facilitator, I'm trying to, I want to do just enough to understand the topic, how I should flow the questions. So I do enough research to understand what are the questions that are going to be popular to answer.
I knew it. I knew it.
Yeah.
But it's, and some people like know a lot, some people don't. Some people look it up before they show up, and that's totally fine. The important thing is it's not required.
Yeah.
You're not going to be shunned because you didn't do your homework, you didn't look it up, you didn't know the definition of a certain thing.
And in the, okay, so how do you pick topics? Like
Usually whatever I'm thinking about. So we have 5 regions now. So we have DC, which is our newest region, Denver, San Antonio, Austin, and Portland. And it depends on the organizer. So the organizers take a lot of like artistic, like,
do you pollinate them? Is it like this time all regions are talking about this thing? No, it's just random.
From my perspective, I'm 100% like laissez-faire with all the regions. And so I will say that in the past, it's kind of bit us in the ass a little bit because, like the one in Austin kind of turned into like a foot fetish thing for a little while, just kind of got off the rails, like,
pardon me, sir.
I was taking a break. I was not facilitating.
Yeah. And so it really depends on the organizer, right? And something that he said in the last conversation that we were just talking about is I don't need to convince you of anything. The organizer's role in this is to facilitate conversation that everybody else can get their ideas out on the table. So a lot of times, like for my meetups, I won't even talk. Like I won't even sit down at a table. A lot of times I'm like updating the back end, like accounting books or whatever. But I get the people talking. If I see people that are kind of like being super quiet, I'll kind of maybe sit down at the table, get them involved. But we've had a couple organizers who did think it was their job to convince people and treated it more as a pulpit. The group is, this is my group and I'm here to make sure they're convinced of whatever I believe. And that's, to me, that's not the ideal.
Yeah. I do love talking. And I'm an opinionated person.
You don't say.
Oh shit.
So, and I tell people that I'm like, listen, I'm a facilitator. I'm not here to take sides or anything like that. But I'm opinionated. I could be like, hey, I'm a little bit of a lefty sometimes. So here's my opinion.
I've noticed.
But there's other cases where like I also really value neutrality. Like it's a value for me to be able to be neutral and see both sides and not just be stuffed with one side's facts. And so oftentimes if I'm participating, I'll actually jump in for the side that's losing if we're having a fight.
Yeah.
So if I see there's one person with a minority opinion and everyone's like, that's a little bit weird, I'll jump in and be like, really? You think that's weird? And I'll like kind of defend them because as the facilitator, I want everyone to feel welcome and not like this is a hostile environment.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So how do you choose your topics?
Whatever's on my mind. If I go through a breakup, I'm guarantee the next topic is going to be relationships and dating. Plus, that tends to be a fairly popular topic, but it's completely random. For me, Denver, me and the other prime organizer there, Nathan, we just pick whatever's on our mind.
I do a lot of picking out as the conversation flows. If people are tangenting and they're going off topic, if I have to bring it back off of that because that topic was kind of like they liked it, I will write that down and I'll be like, we're going to make that a topic in 2 weeks.
Yep.
And you tell them like, hey, let's sideline this whole thing.
Yeah. That's a great topic for another week.
Okay.
Yeah. Because there are definitely things that.
That's a nice way to shut people up.
It is. It's a wonderful one.
Yeah. This is a great topic for another
Great topic. We're going to talk about that when you're not here.
I'll take this note. All right. Perfect.
Yeah.
Anyway, moving on.
Yeah. So like the example is in Denver on Monday, something that came up was social norms. That was not the topic, but that kept coming up. It was closely related. Mm-hmm. And I was like, I think I'm going to post that as a topic. That's a pretty good broad. I try to keep them very broad because that allows the largest audience to have some kind of anecdotal connection to whatever that topic is, which is always what I want. Whereas if I do post something that's like crypto, I don't know how I feel that's a little bit too narrow because there's a bunch of people who are like, I don't care and I don't know anything about it and therefore I'm not going to show up. I may post something more along the lines of monetary systems and how do you maybe money, the idea of money. It's much more broad. Certainly I know crypto is going to come up in that conversation, but it's not the whole bag. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. So what is the most popular of the cohort of questions?
Dating
Gosh,
apps.
Dating apps?
Dating apps is people will talk about it even if it's not even close to being the topic.
Dating is weird because people who show up on a Tuesday, mine's a Tuesday, his is a Monday, but people who show up to a bar on a Tuesday generally don't live in the suburbs with 4 kids.
Right.
So there's a strong...
I'll be honest, that is the reason I don't show up. I mean, what am I going to do, man? Like,
yeah, it's a 25, 30-minute drive for you. So, we hold ours near downtown because that's where I live. Like, I need to be able to go there weekly.
Yeah.
So it's not, people will go, hey, you should do one in Round Rock. I'm like, I don't live in Round Rock.
It's amazing how quickly people are willing to give you advice on how it would behoove them for you to run the group so that's more convenient for specifically them.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's wonderful.
So downtown, you tend to get more single people, and everybody hates dating. So if someone like that just happens to be a topic that everyone loves chatting about, is how much modern dating sucks, and that ends up being a really popular topic.
Interesting. Any good takeaways?
Everybody experiences the same bullshit. I mean, I think it's very different for men and women. Like
but also the same for men and women.
Well,
it's like people go, women are like this. I'm like, men are like that too.
But when I say that, I mean online dating specifically. Like it's for a guy, it's about just continued rejection over and over again, and for women, it's about figuring out from this massive pile of assholes who isn't going to be who's the least asshole for me to pick. I mean, the numbers are ridiculous. And we had a podcast on dating. I forget, it was probably earlier back
on the
in
Thinkers and Drinkers
2023. Yeah,
We should talk about that since that's a bit of a sidebar, but I think it's worth doing. So tell me about the podcast.
So, I mean, we were doing this, the group, and it's always been in person. And everybody loved it. And what, for me, because I'm so active in this community, like literally this is all I do in my free time socially. So I go to work, that's a different life. And then my entire social life is Thinkers. So if I'm doing anything, I post it on the internet, and random people show up and do that also. So if I got like movie nights in my house or whatever. And so for me, it was about trying to meet the demand. Because I'm so active, the group in Denver always has a waiting list of like 50 people, even though this coming Monday, we have 70 people confirmed and 50 on a wait list. And that's just a normal Monday for us. And so for me, it was about what
is a wait list? What does that mean?
So
just because the bar is too full?
It's too full.
I don't have enough seats to put that many. And also, like, depending on your environment, like how much can I actually yell and reach the ears of people to actually start the conversation. So we have 2 bars in Denver, and 65 is about our max for those events.
Wow, sounds like you need 2 events.
Well, we do. So in Denver, we have Mondays, which is a huge one. It's 65 people most weeks. Usually have a wait list of people waiting to get in. And then Wednesdays, we have a smaller group hosted by a guy called Colt, who actually started in the San Antonio region and now lives in Denver. He does about 20 or 25 people, so it's one conversation, whereas on the Mondays, it's each individual table has their own conversation, 4 to 6 seats. So for us, meeting that demand was huge, and so I was like, well, how do I do that? I don't want to, because I live in Castle Rock, which is about, depending on traffic, it's probably 25 miles south of downtown Denver. But in order to capture the biggest audience, we still host in downtown. I didn't want to drive downtown 3 nights a week. So I was like, well, I'll just do a podcast. I had like an extra bedroom. So I just got some of the sound absorbing tiles to stick on the wall and some microphones. And I do 6 to 7 people on a Thursday whenever I'm in town to be able to just have, and it also gets a little bit of a different audience, right? Because not everyone wants to sit in a room of 60 people and have a deep conversation. Right. It's a little overwhelming. It can be.
I don't have that problem in Austin. My group's not that big. It's like 20.
Yet.
We
think big.
Until our Snake show gets published.
Yeah, massive now.
And the gates are open.
Okay, so I'm kind of curious. So we talked a little bit about the Overton window, kind of along that same lines. Do you find that this is like a bastion of heterodox thinking? It's like kind of pushing the needle forward on some really complicated topics. Do you feel like you're actually really hitting those third rail topics the way you want them to? Are people reacting? I mean, are you able to ask the really gross questions that I think a lot of people try to stray away from?
We've asked some really great questions, and and especially as the group evolves and especially as the group evolves into something that's where at least half are reoccurring people that have come, which is basically all our regions are pretty much like that. More than half are reoccurring. So once you have a core group that understand the rules and the flow and the community and how we operate, you can start pushing the boundaries much more. Like a group of randoms who've never been in our group and don't know the rules and don't know the style, that would be harder to push the bounds of a topic. And so I might go a little bit more conservative. But if the group, if we know how to have our conversation and be neutral and not be emotional, and as a facilitator, I try to maintain, if we are being emotional, like, hey, let's shift the conversation a little bit. Because anytime emotions fly, that's when people start getting adversarial. And if it's adversarial, now we can't talk about it without someone getting hurt, And not physically, but
I will say
in person.
Maybe physically.
that, like I talked about a second ago, the demand was so high that I wanted to start another group, another night. So we did Monday, Tuesdays, and Wednesdays, and podcast Thursdays in Denver for a while.
Wow,
so I started
is a full-time job.
It really was. And so I started Tuesdays at a bar down in South Denver, much closer to me. And I thought that I'd have enough kind of overflow from the regular meetup on Mondays come down, because it was maybe 20 minutes. It was the difference between the two locations. But the problem was that everybody was, the demand was being met with that Monday enough where I didn't have a whole lot of overflow. And so most of the people that showed up to the new night were new people. And I mean, Chris knows this as well as anybody else. Starting a new group is literally the hardest thing ever because the culture isn't there. And so you have to really enforce those rules. As an organizer, it's much harder. Whereas like when I show up to Denver, it's like super easy. I throw out a topic and I let people go. And I might have one or two weirdos that kind of just show up, and like I had a hella hyper aggressive dude that I think was on meth last week. Like those intermittent things I have to manage. But on a regular night, I just sit back and I go and sit at the tables and listen to conversations and have a conversation. It's just as easy for me. It's just as enjoyable for me. But in new group, it's super hard because you are continuously having to project that culture out into the group and enforce the culture, and not in a weird kind of like I don't need to read rules to people, but you have to be the example, and you have to be ever present in that conversation for people to understand what the culture is, because they're all new people. And so I gave it up because I was like, I just wasn't ready to start a new group again. I thought that it would be easier, and it wasn't. And I was like, I'm abandoning Tuesday nights. I'm not doing this because it's literally the hardest thing ever.
So do you go out of your way to find people with contrarian views that can spark interesting conversations?
I remember a topic in San Antonio we had, and this was, it was like 2016 timeframe before it got like all popular in the news, but we had posted a topic about polyamory, and we looked at the demographics and the people that were going to show up, and there were like 14 people going to show up at first that were signed up at the time, and we looked at each other and we're like, none of these people are polyamorous. Like, what are we going to talk about? We're going to be like, what do you think those people think? You know, like, how do they manage, jealousy? Is it what is it? And so he reached out to the polyamory meetup.
The mayor of the San Antonio polyamory community.
I mean, can you send some representatives over?
Send us a squad.
They outnumbered us.
That's great.
And the conversation was totally different.
But I remember that conversation. It was what really drove me, and this was one of those pivotal moments, is that specific conversation is we had someone that was 17, so somebody brought their daughter to the meetup, one of our regulars, and then we had all these poly people, which were varying ages, mostly in their 20s, early 30s. And then we had a woman who was like 75 and had been a widow, right? And the difference in opinion across that span, and everybody listened and everybody talked, but you had this, like wild kind of like, this is a new way to look at relationships and everything goes, and we just communicate openly and everything's fine. And then you had the woman who was like, literally, when my husband died, I knew I was never going to love again. And that's it. And it was like, these are two realities that can exist at the same time in the same place. And everybody understood that because of the conviction that people spoke with, and it was amazing. Like, this to me was one of those culminating events that I will always remember. Of like, oh, I think we're onto something here. These are two different worlds, but they exist at the same time. And when you introduce them to each other, they also understand each other, which is super interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, So you guys have a set of rules. Can you walk me through kind of the flow of the meeting as you've kind of decided to build it out?
Yeah, one of the things that we've done over the last couple of years is build a facilitator guide to help our different regions kind of do that. And so we basically tell people how to do that. And we have a general flow that it will always choose a very broad topic. And so that broad topic could be, if it's polyamory, if it's immigration, if it's, some broad topic, then we don't necessarily publish this, but in our description, we might talk about some of the questions about that topic that we could be talking about. And as facilitators...
So, wait, back up. Is this like literally like the very first thing is like, here's a question, or is there like an opening statements, or like how do you...
So the general flow is we'll do introductions. So I'll say, hey, everybody at your table, if we break up into tables or if we do a large group session, most of mine are like 8-person tables. And I'll say, hey, at your tables, everyone go around the table and say, what's your name, where you're from, and some, fact, some funny question I'll ask to get an icebreaker.
Yeah, fun fact or something.
And then I'll have 3 prompts that I'll do throughout I'll have more prompts that just come to my head. And a prompt is like, we're talking about, immigration. Let's say the first conversation might be like, do you know any? Let's tell a story about an immigrant that you know. That might be something, just a personal story that helps us get to know each other, and it's not very adversarial.
Sure.
And so that's prompt 1. And prompt 2 might be, let's talk about, geopolitics and like what countries are doing. Maybe even what other countries that are not the U.S. doing about this. Okay, let's talk about what we know about that. And so I will guide the conversation using these 3 prompts. And the idea is that the first prompt is designed to be less adversarial and more get to know each other, and get each other talking. And then as the night progresses, as people have more drinks, the third topic end up being the real meaty one.
Gotcha. And at the end, do you collect these thoughts somehow? I realize you have Chatham House rules, but do you like say, here's the best of the cool things we said during this meeting and kind of publish it out? Or like, do you have any permanence in this meeting?
Permanence, no, but I always do a closing round where, I've been kind of hopping around tables all night long. But about usually I close out at 9. So at 8:53, I'll say, hey, that's kind of the end of it. All the tables will now be focused on me. I'll say, okay, we're just going to go around the room, and I'm just going to hit each table and volunteer. Just tell me something that you learned tonight I thought was pretty interesting or awe-inspiring or something like that. And I'll go table by table, and usually it's the veterans, the people who've been there for a while, that'll kind of like represent the table and say, and usually it's the last conversation they had because it's, object permanence or whatever. But they'll say, something that I learned was, X, Y, or Z. Some of it will be very awe-inspiring, depending on the person who's, like call it volunteering for the table and where the conversation went. Sometimes it'll be like, everybody hates whatever, or, it'll be funny. But that's the closeout, is every table kind of talks about something that they learned. And they'll say, thank you for coming out. This only runs because you guys show up. If you sign up, show up, and make sure to sign up for future events. And then we're done and people hang out.
I think the core of the answer to your question is no. We don't actually catalog all the things that we talk about. This is.
Do you wish you could, or is it just it's sort of better if it isn't? Or
I think it's better if it isn't, but I also think the podcast is that as well.
Okay,
this is a microcosm of the overall group.
Yeah, and I think especially in the controversial topics, we enforce the Chatham House rule, which is like, hey, don't go on Twitter later and be like, Ian said he didn't like black people. Like, I heard him say it.
Which is totally not true. I love black people.
Like, nobody should be doing anything like that. No one should be, because we're gonna be entertaining thoughts that are maybe a loosely held opinion, and we should be able to be free to say that at our meeting without it being something that's going to go get us fired. Because we get, I have plenty of opinions that I have strong opinions on, and I have plenty of opinions that are like barely researched, loosely held opinions. And if someone counters me, I'll be like, oh yeah, I was wrong. Like, I don't want someone going and publishing that and saying that's what I believe.
True. So I've been involved in little groups, nothing anywhere near as big or structured as what you're talking about. And fortunately, in one case, things were really well documented, like really, really, not who said what, just the stats that were mentioned and some of the details. And I am really glad, because a couple of times I've gone back to that same research or the same set of conversations, which came from a lot of people who were very deep thinkers about the topic at hand, had done their homework. And when we got back, it was like, that's about a good research paper as you could ever produce on this topic from very, very intelligent people on this set of issues. And, you throw ChatGPT at it to summarize it, and man, you have yourself a very, very thorough, well understanding of that particular issue. But that only works if you document it. Yeah. You can't do anything with no documentation. It's like that old Russian adage. Some old guy bought a car, and the kid's like, well, it was all rusted out and messed up and not functioning. And he's like, why did you buy this old car? He's like, because you can't fix nothing, And so it's kind of nice if you have some documentation. You can decide what to do with it someday down the road. No names, obviously.
Yeah.
Just a thought.
Yeah, I think it's worth considering. I think part of my weekly thing is the fact that I don't do as much work as he does. So on this, so I like to show up and have conversations and go home at the end of the night and not like type out an email.
Yeah, sure. No. Well, that's what
to be fair,
ChatGPT
I'm the
is
same
for.
way.
Yeah. Does it fall for you? Okay, so you have different versions of the conversations. Like one of them was a parlay, and you have some others. Can you kind of talk through what that is?
Yeah, so we call these like formats, and so generally, like we have, one of our original names was storytellers, and so you want to talk a little bit about the Think and Drink and the storytellers two formats.
So the Think and Drink is the regular one, right? That's just you have a topic and everybody shows up and talks about it. I was much better at having, when it wasn't such a large group, when you have more like 20 or 30 people, it was easier to do the more kind of sideline topics. So storytellers is it is a crowd pleaser for sure. It's one of my favorites. We have a topic, and then you still have a full crew of people that show up, but people get up one at a time. And we actually have one of our locations in Denver has a little stage. They get up on stage and they tell a story within the boundaries of that topic.
About that topic, yeah.
Yeah. And so it can be fun. It can be awe-inspiring. It can be, the last one we did, it was about 2 months ago. And I told Nathan, because he was the one that hosted that night, and I was just there. I was like, this is amazing. Like you couldn't have found like professional storytellers that had gotten up and there were certainly others that were more well kind of versed than others, but it was amazing. Like people had, like the lead was at the end, and they had like a joke, and it was like bang, and people were amazed. Or
it's like Toastmasters.
It was better than Toastmasters because it was completely just organic, right? And I think that is one of our favorite nights because everybody has a story to tell, right? And so that's a good one. Yeah. And then we would do another one. What was the other one we would do?
Well, the storytellers, we have these rules like don't monologue. Everyone gets a chance to speak. And storytellers, we forego that rule.
Right. Right. Yeah, for obvious reasons.
Yeah. And you just have one person speaking
But for not very long though, right? 5 minutes.
People can ask
5 minutes. Yeah. People ask follow-up questions.
Yeah.
And so you'll maybe have 8-10 people over the night, and everybody else just sat there and listened. But it's always one of the most popular nights. That one's really good. And then I used to do one where we'd pick an aggressively divisive topic, like abortion. And then you say, if you're pro-abortion, you sit on this side of the room. If you're anti-abortion, you sit on this side of the room.
Sides.
I never do it that way.
I only did that a few times. It was okay. But the problem was I was in Stuttgart, Germany, and it was much more. People aren't as divisive in places outside the U.S. I've found, and so it wasn't quite as, I guess, emotionally jarring as I think it would have been in the U.S.
Yeah, so that's actually a caveat to that is another format that we have. The Think and Drink is the normal weekly. That's what we do normally. But whenever we were having these controversial conversations, this question of this is where it gets a little bit stickier. It's potentially, it could devolve into a fight and a debate, and people get emotional or people get hurt or something, offended. And so it really never actually ended up being as bad as people think it can be, because the group flows so well and they understand each other and they've got a rapport and they understand, I think everybody speaks. But I do find that I do need to enforce the rules a little bit more when it gets too much. And especially like during the Trump era, things got really partisan. And so
it's coming back.
Yeah. Living in Texas. I know. And living in Texas, we're a little blue dot, in Austin, and 10 miles away, we got a bunch of, big red sea. And so I tend to get lots of both sides. And if I'm having a conversation about socialism or capitalism,
that is the thing I think I really like about Texas.
Yeah.
It's It's all of it. It's very right, very left. Not a lot in the center, I've noticed.
I try to be the beacon of light. But so that format is fairly new. We've always done it. We've always had rules, and we put it in our facilitator guide. And this last year, actually, probably in December, formalized and have been experimenting with a format called parlay. Parlay.
Yeah, explain that.
So parlay is it's interesting because it's a French word. Parler is to speak, but it's also Pirates of the Caribbean when they raise the white flag and say, "Let's stop shooting each other for a minute and talk." And you can't harm me until we're done with the parlay. It's that concept, and so it's like, hey, we're going to talk about immigration, we're going to talk about abortion, we're going to talk about race, and we're going to stop shooting each other for a minute, and we're just going to talk about it as civilized people. And we can go back on Facebook and fight about it later. But for now, we're under the flag of truce.
What does that look like?
And so
let's say I'm yelling at you. Now what?
Yeah, so we say, hey, parlay with me. Let's talk about the topic. And so the rules that we came up with to facilitate that, we even have them, printed out.
Dandy. Is this something you give to people, by the way?
This is laminated, so it's at the meeting.
Okay, so you just kind of point at it,
And some of these are if people have been through our meetings, they know these things intuitively, so they don't have to be told. But during a parlay, especially a controversial topic, I'll actually go and talk and say, hey, here's the 7 or 8 rules. Like, everyone speaks, no interrupting, no monologuing, no dominating.
We're gonna have to go slower.
Yeah, and so those 4.
Come on, let's do it. Let's do it one by one. So everyone speaks. That's an obvious one. Makes sense. That's
everyone gets a chance to speak.
Yeah, we already talked about that one.
And so no interrupting, absent a clear rule violation.
All right. Now, I have a lot of questions about this, and I'm interrupting you specifically because of this exact issue. What if I have clarifying questions? So
those do happen, and these are, just as the Pirates of the Caribbean, these are more like guidelines than rules. So absent a clear rule violation, we allow people to finish their point without cutting them off. That's our default position.
Right.
Now,
it allows people to fully articulate their entire point, because your question may be answered by more in there. So there is a cadence.
So what if you use some word I've never heard of? I'm like, well, what's that word mean? That's a clarification question.
So Rule 3 solves that.
Okay.
It's the no monologuing, which means that make your point or observation succinctly. Don't take up a bunch of time. So if you're making a point that only takes 30 to 45 seconds, people have a chance now to ask clarifying questions.
Right.
If you're monologuing for 4 minutes, I'm going to have to stop you and be like, we don't even know what the heck you're talking about.
Yeah, we stopped listening about 4 minutes ago.
Okay.
And so those 4 rules.
And is that something that does actually happen? People
for sure.
just tune out, start drinking, have
some people
side
love
conversations.
hearing themselves.
And some people just don't understand that, right? Like, and I'm sure, running this podcast, you've probably had people, and they've made their point, and then they'll make it again, and then and I don't know if it's discomfort of speaking in front of people, but people tend to just kind of just diarrhea of the mouth, just keep going. It's like and I have a couple of people in my head that I'm envisioning when I talk about that are at the group, and for me, it was always about trying to kind of catch them as a pause. So what you're saying is this, awesome, and now we're moving on.
Yeah, but people really don't. People don't really realize it until they've been through our flow a few times, like how much time they're actually taking when they speak. If there's 8 people at a table, and I'm going to give you a prompt and another one in 20 minutes, or a break in 20 minutes.
That's not a lot of time.
It's not a lot of time. You get 2 minutes per person, maybe, with a little bit of fluff. And so if you're taking 4 minutes to make a point, and people want to go and interrupt you and say, hey, asking clarifying questions, or they're just dominating the conversation. So those 4 rules: everyone speaks, no interrupting, no monologuing, no dominating. I say those fast because they tend to all interplay.
Okay, dominating. What do you mean by that?
Dominating means you're not sharing the floor. And so
isn't that literally the same thing as monologuing?
It isn't, because monologuing is taking 4 minutes to make a point, whereas dominating is responding to everybody's thing.
Yeah.
So if you're dominating, you're basically saying you made a point and then he makes a point. So if I'm the dominator, I'm going to be responding to everybody's point. And so it's very obvious when these people show up.
So for 8 people, they're taking half the time.
Yeah.
I feel like there's
and everybody
technology.
else is getting 4%.
You could build something like a little, like if I'm talking, I have to press the button,
light.
And then it's like, well, you press that button like a lot of times. You're dominating.
I've experimented this in other things. Like, we used to do this thing called the gavel pass in college. You could only speak if you had the gavel, and you could only hold it for 1 minute. So I haven't done that in our group yet, but if we had a problem with the dominator, we might.
Or it shocks you after 1 minute. You're like, okay, I got this really important thing to say. All right. So you have a bunch of, I don't know what to describe them, like around the world yield. I don't know what you would call these things. Are these techniques or conversational tools, or what would you phrase those things as?
I call them conversational tools.
Okay.
And so, for instance, if we're having some of the conversation's free flow, and so it'll go back and forth. Maybe
wait, we didn't cover off on all of them.
Oh, we didn't.
No, let's finish that first, and then we'll do this other thing. Sorry.
So no fighting. That's physical and verbal.
Okay, but obviously if people disagree.
Yes.
So
this
could
is again
be considered
this
violence.
Is very subjective. Yeah. So
well, I think most reasonable people understand the difference between fighting and conversation.
Some
do
people.
they?
Some people.
Yes. People that show up to this,
Okay.
I would say.
Do they have a bit of thicker skin, do you find?
Thicker skin, yes. They came with an understanding that they were going to have a conversation about something with, a bunch of people that probably don't agree with them.
This is the number one thing I start every one of my controversial topics with, is I always tell the group, the no fighting rule is the main one I push, is because we're here to have a discussion and learning about each other's viewpoints. We're not here to solve the problem, or not here to win an argument. And so with that context, we tend to not have to enforce this no fighting rule. And some debates can happen. It does happen. People will go back and forth. Hey, wait a minute. What you just said was wrong, or what you just said offends somebody. That does happen, but the goal isn't to keep going until someone finds a winner. If we're just watching people go back and forth on something, we're like, guys, this is devolving into a debate. Let's shift the question a little bit, maybe reframe. Okay. And so if we disagree with someone, I have to say this is, if you disagree with someone so fundamentally, at some point, you have to let them have their opinion. And on online, people stay up and say, well, someone's wrong on the internet, I have to prove them wrong. No, they can have their opinion.
But they can also do it afterwards too, right? Do people just kind of stay there all night, just continuing having the argument?
No, we got a big group that stays after dark.
Yeah. But I mean, do they no, I need to convince this person, and the person's like, no, you're wrong, and they just kind of stay there all night?
I nip it in the butt.
Oh, really?
I know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I mean,
you have to let them have their opinions.
I felt like it was much more prevalent when we had, I was more controlling of it when I had one group, one conversation, kind of before we breached the 35 person limit, and I had to break it up into tables. But, if people are dominating at the table, what I'll talk about, because this is an Austin thing, I don't codify the rules for Denver, but I think it has to do with the maturity of the group, not mental maturity or emotional maturity. It's more about how long we've been running and under one regime of organizer.
And because you have the waiting period or whatever, it really is the same people, approximately.
No, we'll talk about that later too. Let's get through the rest of these rules, and then I'll talk about how I approach it a little bit differently than this.
Well, the reason I asked that specific question is, if it's the same people, week after week, month after month, or whatever,
it would get stale.
Oh, okay.
That's what I found.
Interesting.
Because it would be, especially if I had a group of 25.
That's
it would be the same 25
That's not
people.
what I was getting at. What I was getting at is, it seems like that would then mean you don't have to have these rules, because people would inherently.
Right. It's a balance.
He runs without printing them out at all, and he doesn't actually codify.
I don't
these.
say them out loud.
And so, but these are kind of understood. When I go to Denver, I can pretty much guarantee that they play along something like this.
Yep.
It's not that these are. I have in the Austin group, I am actually. I'm printing these out for people and saying, hey, we're going to do this thing called a parlay, because we're going to have a controversial conversation, and I want to experiment with it because I want to bring this to a broader audience. And so I don't need to bring these to a group that has been to many meetings. But if I want to go to, when we opened up DC, I'm like, DC, there's a lot of partisans in DC. Like, what are we going to do? And so I sent him these documents that I was working on and said, you might want to use these, just in case someone.
Yeah, it makes sense for new organizations for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Especially new organizers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. True. Yeah.
Because a lot of people want that. They want, how do I? It came kind of innately for the two of us, because that's what we envision in our heads without saying it out loud, and so we just started doing it. And then obviously we kind of adapted and changed over time. So these definitely exist in the Denver group, but I don't have to speak it out loud because it's baked into the culture that everybody everybody that's done 2, 3, 4 or more of the meetups is kind of projecting these into the group.
Gotcha. Okay, so
number 6 is controversial, and we don't even agree on it, but it's no judgment of people. And so
of people.
Yeah, so we discuss ideas, not people, and we can say that idea sucks, but you can't say you suck because you have that idea. And so I try to limit people.
You think we don't agree on that?
Well, we agree on that. I've had.
I just hate you as a person.
I like the flow of the way I wrote it. It was like everyone speaks, no interrupting, no fighting, no judgment, and everyone's like, no judgment, and I'm like, oh, people, it's I'm like, I'm working on the writing of it. I think I finally got it.
What are you worried about there?
I'm not worried about much, but it's just like no judgment no judgment of people. And people always ask, they're always pushing back on that, and they're saying like, well, what if someone's saying something offensive or racist or.
What if they're literally a Nazi, not figuratively?
Yeah, what if they're literally a Nazi? Can I judge them? I'm like,
no.
You know what? Honestly, I would love to have a Nazi come to my meetings
100%.
so we can ask him some questions.
Hell yeah.
Why do you believe this?
I invite people like that.
Yeah, sure.
'Cause
I would too, as well. By the way,
I want to like the whole idea, right? We talked about the Overton
not to indoctrinate
window.
myself, but more the other way around.
Yeah. Right. We found our guy.
Found him. No, but I think you're right. It is about expanding the Overton window. Mm-hmm. And so if we're having a conversation about, let's say, polyamory, and I gather a group that all basically has the same. For me, Denver is very blue, and we don't have the benefit of having like a sea of red outside. It's still kind of more moderate everywhere. Mm-hmm. But I still like, if you get everybody in the same room and you talk about trans rights, or you talk about wearing masks, or you talk about vaccines, they're all going to basically agree. And so I will literally invite someone that I know disagrees with the kind of accepted norm, because I'm going to put them in there and I'm going to back them up.
How do you go about sourcing Nazis exactly? I mean, not them.
I don't know any personal Nazis.
Not that exactly.
But I'll find somebody who's like an anti-vaxxer.
Okay.
And I know that.
And how do you do that?
I'll because of the people that I've met.
Okay.
Right. So if it's somebody,
you should go.
Yeah. Hey man, can you come to this? Like, I really think your opinion is needed in this forum. And it's not and I know the anti-vaxxer thing has changed over time, of course, but like someone who in 2021 was not like, I want this now, please give it to me, I'll drink it out of a cat dish, if that's how you present it. It's someone that says, I'm a little hesitant and here's why.
Yeah.
And that was, I mean, talk about hot topics. That was a wild one.
I bet.
Yeah, I think like topics like immigration are hard because it's hard to say.
People in Denver don't
if someone has an opinion that says, I don't want more immigrants in my country.
Okay.
And someone else says, well, you're a racist because if you have that opinion.
Right,
I'm like,
judgment.
you are breaking rule 6. Let's talk about the idea. Let's talk about stuff. And it may be true. Maybe they are a racist. But like, let's save that for 9 o'clock when I'm done.
When I'm not here anymore. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. All right.
Yeah, so 7, which I think is the most important, probably doesn't have to be said often, but it is. I put it down because it's so fundamental, and all the rest of them don't have to be said if we just follow 7. It's the golden rule. It's assume people have good intent. On Twitter, when you post something, people don't assume you have good intent. They assume you're a propagandist and you're lying.
Well, you might be.
You might be.
It's
true.
Twitter.
Yeah, you might be. But this assume good intent is
X.com.
X.com.
Make sure we're using the right words here, gents.
Yeah. Sorry, Elon. But this assume good intent thing is like, begin with the assumption that participants that are coming to this table have good intent. Like if they do use a logical fallacy, if they say something wrong, if they offend you, assume they didn't mean to do that, like to hurt you. Like just maybe they did, but like let's back our brain into the first default position that they are not an asshole.
Right.
Maybe we can bring it up. Hey, I was offended by that. But we're not going to hate them for it, and we're going to assume good intent. And if everyone follows that, we tend to have a really good conversation.
And ultimately, if you're offended by everything, this group might not be for you. You might just want to be in therapy. Like, he and I are not doctors. We don't have any letters after our names. This is always the thing, is people come up to me, and they're like, hey, this person said this and this and this. And I'm like, okay. Like, that's literally the whole purpose of this group, is that everybody feels comfortable.
Yeah.
Now, there's, like I said, 6 people over 9 years, 3 different groups in 3 different countries that I've kicked out. Most of those were people that they were either like way off the rails. Like there was this one kid who had an ankle bracelet, and told us why he had the ankle bracelet, and he had threatened to shoot up a pizza parlor because some girl didn't talk to him, and he was just not. He was making people uncomfortable, and so I got rid of him. There's one guy last week. Like I said, I'm 80% sure he's just like roided out.
Oh, that was the
it's like
mess
this
guy.
Well, yeah, it was like a like this Marine, former Marine. I think he got on like the 90s, but he was just like, listen, everybody lacks accountability, and I'm the person that's there to give it to them. And I'm like, okay. And he was doing the thing where there's 8 people at the table. He's responding to everybody and just taking all the time. So I went up to him afterwards. Hey, man, like next time, because he came up to me and he's like, this was really fun. I want to come back. Normally those people do not do that. They kind of get that they're not fitting in. Mm-hmm. He was like, I'm coming back. And I'm like, cool. Next time, can you make sure you listen as much as you speak? And he's like, what do you mean? I think I listened. And I was like, I mean, I sat at the table because I saw him and people came up to me and were like, you can watch this guy. And I was like, I sat at the table for a while. You're very aggressive, and I think your opinion matters, and I think you have a lot to offer, but you got to understand the audience here. Like, you got to know your audience. And he kind of got it, right? I kind of did the whole, like, we're both vets.
Yeah.
They don't know what we've been through.
Yeah, sure.
Kind of a bullshit thing. But he was like, yeah, okay.
In Space Force.
Space. In a world full of space.
One man.
Yeah. With guys like that, I don't tell them I was in the Space Force. I tell them I was in the Air Force. I get to pick both sides.
Okay, all right. But he did not come back?
This was last week, so we'll see on Monday.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
He might listen to this podcast and know he's not available. He's not welcome.
Well, maybe he is welcome. Maybe he just needs a little bit of coaching.
Needs a little coaching.
There were several people that asked me to kick him out, and I was like, I don't do that. Like, I'm not going to do that unless he did something that's just completely unacceptable.
Like date one of your exes. Yeah.
I mean, I have had those
one of those exes. Yes.
As a facilitator, you do have to field these requests. So some people will come up and they're like, "Hey, I was offended. This person doesn't like the fact that I'm gay."
The
Catholic guy doesn't think.
The intonation of your voice is interesting that you chose to.
Oh, well, sorry.
Illuminate
I
this.
did not mean that. But
Guys,
anyway, just
somebody
people come up
offended
and
me.
they'll ask me to kick someone out because they have an opinion that they're offended by.
Uh-huh.
And I'm like, I don't have a rule in here that says they can't have a bad opinion.
All right.
Like, I'm not going to kick them out.
Right.
So that's why another reason I wrote these down is because like people will ask me to kick them out for things like opinions they hold.
Uh-huh.
And I'm like, did they try to assault you with their opinion? Are they trying to shove it down your throat? Are they trying to dehumanize you? Like just stating your opinion.
But even all those, it seem like they're not against the rule.
Right.
Yeah. Fighting might be.
Fighting. That's a different one.
Yeah. I mean, hate speech is one of those that's hard because we're trying to have a conversation, and the Overton window is interesting because sometimes people can bring up something that could be hurtful. I'll bring one up. I had a guy that I'm not going to name names, but
it's in the rules.
Yeah, Chatham House rules. We can share what we heard, but we don't tell the affiliation.
Sure.
I use that rule when I'm having really controversial stuff. So
of course.
Anyway, this guy, he was actually very brutally open, and it was after 3 hours of drinking. And so he felt open enough, and I was glad that we facilitated a space where he could feel open enough to say this. But he said, "Hey, I'm like, he's a white guy, and he's telling this to me and another group member that was black." And he said, "I actually don't like black people." And he said that out loud, and a bunch of people gasped that he had said it out loud. And the black guy said, "Why?" And he was not shocked. He just goes, "Why?" And he goes, "Well, I grew up in a poor Atlanta school, and I was one of 5 white kids, and I was beat up every day by black people when I was a kid. And so I kind of grew up fearing them." And he goes, "I understand." And it was like the most beautiful thing I've ever seen.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, that would never happen if people were like, "Well, you're a racist. You can't say that."
Or I disagree with this opinion, or this opinion is
or he's not
directed
allowed here
me.
anymore because he doesn't,
right.
He said this.
Or even that there was any understanding that would become the reality that he was in, right? Mm-hmm. People that come to the group, they feel safe to actually say the things that they're thinking out loud, because that's how you fix. If you have a bad idea, you have updates available on your computer. If you have a bad idea, the idea of like getting your ideas out there and kind of testing them against the world and having people kind of unjudgmentally approach them and say, "Interesting that you think about it that way. Why do you think about it that way?" Okay. Yeah. Okay. Like that works.
Try to figure out
that's
why
not
you
my
believe
experience.
that.
Yeah. I don't need to convince you otherwise. Cool.
Yeah. I mean, this is a person that had been into the group multiple times. He wasn't leveraging his hatred to spew it. He wasn't, causing a ruckus.
Well, I think. Well, first of all, I'm curious. Did they break bread at the end? Did they try to talk it out?
There was chatting actually aside. I didn't hear the rest of the conversation, but the conversation in the group was very much a lot of people gasped. They were like, "How dare you, say that?" And there's.
But also in Austin, Texas, how brave is it for a person to actually say that?
No,
right? Like
great.
that to me is the.
So if you're trying to end racism, why wouldn't you embrace the racist and fix the problem of introducing him to someone who's a totally normal, upstanding citizen who happens to be somebody you think you hate and turns out you don't? Yep. I mean, that sounds like an amazing situation, not a bad one. So why wouldn't you? I know you already agree with me, but why wouldn't one cultivate such an environment?
Yeah. Well, I don't know that
the choir is here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. On that issue, anyway.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, I once people understand the group is there to be able to put those, like, hey, I have a really, like, I did a whole week on unpopular topics. Like, come with an unpopular topic. Like, or an unpopular opinion. I don't think vaccines are safe. Okay, let's talk about it. Everybody's like, oh my God, that's wild. Well,
in Denver it is.
No, it is.
Here that's a normal conversation.
No,
on the street.
in Denver it's very, like, especially in 2021, that was one of my most heated topics. One of the other ones was like religion, right? I specifically asked people who had religious beliefs to come to the group because pretty much everybody that shows in my group is atheist or agnostic or spiritual. And I'm like, you know what? As a I'm 40 years old now. If I had a book of answers to go back to, so I don't have to walk out the door every day trying to do these mental gymnastics of what's right and wrong, I would appreciate that. Like, I get I understand the validity of it. Like, it would be really nice. And so I'm like, no, let this guy talk. Like, what happens when you die? My opinion is like, because a lot of people are just like, nothing happens. You close your eyes and you turn into dirt. And you're like, that's true. Really feels like not good. And so one guy was like, I don't know what happens, but I want to believe there's something more. And this woman, trans woman, also, which is interesting dynamic, is like that you can't think that. And I'm like, well, hold on. Why are we saying you can't think that?
It's very rigid thinking.
Right.
She's like, well, if science says that, if science doesn't give you the scientific theory, like the method, right, the scientific method, if you cannot refute that something exists, you must say it doesn't exist. You must accept the null hypothesis, right? And the null hypothesis in this would be that there is no afterlife because we can't prove that there is one.
Okay, so we can't prove $1 million exists.
But my thing was,
I've never seen one in person. Have you?
Right. And for me, it was interesting because this is coming from a trans woman, right? So what would science tell us about you? And we're all calling you she. We're all doing that with you. And you're coming after this guy for saying he wants to believe in an afterlife? Oh my God, I was just like, this is wild. But those are the kind of conversations I want, right? Because both of those people could kind of see, and nobody was convinced other than what they already came with. Like, everybody left with the same opinion that they probably came with. But as someone on the periphery, it's nice to see that people can have these disagreements and still hug it out at the end of the night.
Okay, let's talk about the different conversational tools. And we can do
My
this.
favorite is hand jobs.
We can we can do this kind of quick. I don't want to spend a ton of time on this. But I do think it's worth it for someone listening to go, oh, that's cool, because they may not have heard of any of these. And some of them I think might be useful just in their day jobs or in situations where they're just kind of in a general disagreement with somebody. So it would be worth just kind of quickly hitting them and going through them.
Yeah, so some of the ones that we use mostly is probably the around the world. And that's to break up if there's an 8-person table and there's 4 people kind of going back and forth and really dominating that conversation, even though they're trading, fairly, there's some quiet people.
Yeah.
As a facilitator, I might jump in and ask an around the world question, which means, hey, everyone, quick answer, 10 seconds or yes or no questions or whatever, very short answers. What's your opinion on X? And so we'll just go around.
It's a great platform for trading social media.
So exactly. So everybody gets a chance to speak, and it breaks up that little cluster that just happened, gets the quiet people to talk. And I usually only have to do it once, and then all of a sudden it reopens the conversation.
Yeah.
And then people realize when I do that, they usually realize, oh yeah, there is a quiet end of the table. Let's listen to them.
Right.
So the around the world's great.
It brings your quiet people in, and it kind of tampers tamps down your more loud, aggressively dominating.
You haven't named these personas yet. I'm surprised.
Named them?
Yeah, it seems like there's different kinds of personas.
Because that would be judgment.
Yeah, we do have names for these. We have names for these.
there.
But we have one called Loud Guy. There's always, every group has a loud guy. They're always the one that is speaking the loudest, wants to be heard, and we're always like, how do
And
we
it
shut
is
up,
always
loud
a guy.
It's always
always a guy.
It's always a guy.
Always a guy.
Always a guy. Huh.
It's a
Interesting.
loud guy. Every group has one.
Yeah, and then we'll have. I don't have personas per se in the group, but I know there's always ones that pop up right there, and most of the time they're guys. There's guys that show up there just looking for dates, and then. Well, and the meetup, his shirt is not helping us, right? Because meetup, in all their infinite wisdom, instead of just fixing the application, which is terrible, by the way.
It's not a great app.
It's terrible. Instead of fixing it, they just release more features that make it more of a grimy dating app. So literally now, after you go to a meetup, it's like, you have 24 hours to match with people that you met at the meetup. And literally you can just go in there and it just shows you the pictures of everybody that was confirmed for the event.
Anybody with long hair.
And you can check and you can pick 3 people that you quote unquote connected with, and if they pick you back, you match. It was like, oh, so we've implemented a Tinder feature on Meetup, and I'm like, this was the whole reason that I originally chose Meetup, is because it wasn't that. It was like you show up with no expectations of that being the case,
Right.
and half the shit that you see on Meetup now is all like dating, like singles in Denver. No, it's like literally trash.
Okay.
So another, probably the last tool I'll bring up. Actually, I've got like 2 more, and these are ones that I don't think the Denver group uses very much. I've been experimenting a lot with these, and I think we've used pieces of them, but I'm trying to codify them a lot with Parlay, and so I'll be sharing it with the broader group as those become tested. And so one of them is called a truce. So say me and you, or 2 sides of a table, are in a deep lock debate. It's an entrenched debate, and we're going back and forth, and we're not really getting the ball moving off the 50-yard line. At some point, that debate has to end, because this group is not a debate group. And so how do you do that? And so one way is, either side or the facilitator can call a truce. And the truce is that each side takes turns saying something positive about the other person's argument.
So steel man them up.
Kind of steel man them up. Yeah. Say, hey, I'm agreeing that I don't agree. We haven't established, that I agree on your strategy. I don't agree with you, but it was really interesting that you said X. I learned something new. And then they have a chance to say the same thing. Actually, your side is kind of right on this piece. And then they shake hands, and we applaud. If it's done in good faith, we end on a positive note, instead of being like, I need to get my piece out, and I didn't get it. I got shut down by the facilitator. The truce allows us to kind of be like, oh, they're good people still.
Cool. Okay.
And that I've used it a couple times now, and it's been very powerful.
All right. What's the next one?
The other one is olive branching. And so olive branching is, oftentimes there's a 2-sided debate. Every time in a debate, it tends to be a thing that
debate, and then you say this isn't a debate.
It isn't. But people tend to go into a debate. So especially if there's a controversy or a disagreement, people tend to flee to the opposite ends of that argument. So, for instance, like, there are things within like the immigration debate. And I keep bringing that up because it's a recent one I had. But there are certainly in the debate of like no more immigrants, or yes, build the wall, don't build the wall. We can fall back on these talking points of the most extreme disagreements we have. But there is another aspect of this debate where we both agree. Do we both agree that human beings, regardless of where they're from, have general basic rights? Can we both agree on that? So an olive branch is, guys, let's stop. Let's put a pause on this fight over the extremes of our argument, and let's take a minute and talk about something we both agree on, and establish a point of agreement. And so I call it an olive branch, where we say, yeah, we disagree, but what do we not disagree on? What do we agree on?
Find the overlap in the
Find the
Venn
overlap.
diagram.
And so we say, we all agree that people have basic human rights, even if they're from, Argentina and they're poor. We both agree with that. So, okay, that's a better place to jump off into a more productive conversation than trying to go to the most extreme partisan sides of our argument. It just changes the dynamic of the conversation.
So I think now is the time that we try some. We actually do it.
Let's do it.
Okay, a couple of rules before we start. We've been drinking for a while now, so maybe that's a little different than the average situation.
For podcasts, maybe not for thinkers and drinkers.
Really? So enough people drink before they get there, or they get there early and drink?
I mean, as you start the night, people haven't had any drink. They're probably coming off work. But,
they haven't hit a happy hour. And
alcoholics like me tend to get there really quick.
Okay, got it. So number 2, we're going to time box it at approximately, call it half an hour per thing we talk about.
Perfect.
That was just a way we have some way to end it.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we might just go forever because it might be interesting. We're taking a total hiatus on the Chatham House stuff.
Yep.
For
We're
obvious
publishing.
reason, because I don't know if you guys have noticed, these are going.
Where did these cameras come from?
We might be canceled later. We don't know.
Let's hope.
Yeah.
I really haven't been canceled yet. I really want to be.
Oh,
Any
could be
marketing is good marketing.
I feel like everyone deserves a good canceling once in a while.
Yeah, sure. So I think because of the way this is structured, instead of it being a big group, it's kind of a small group.
Yeah.
And you guys are both moderators, so it might just be that you're both moderating, but you're also participating at the same time.
And really, a good moderator, that's what it feels like anyway.
Okay.
The people aren't like, you're the moderator, I'm listening to you. You're just in the conversation.
Yeah, and the great thing is when because we break up into tables when we have a very large group, and so it tends to be that the people who've been at multiple meetings tend to act as the facilitator, and everyone tends to like I don't need to go in and ask for an around the world because the participants are like, hey, let's do an around the world. Part of the group isn't talking, and they tend to do that.
Cool.
So in our group, we're probably going to fall into that pattern.
Maybe. I'm brand new, so I'm off the street. I'm the roided out dude who's
Perfect.
The belligerent.
Okay, so I picked these 2 topics. I wouldn't say exactly at random because there's no such thing as random in your own brain, but just kind of like one was designed to be an easy conversation I don't think is going to be ultra contentious, but who knows?
Yeah.
You never know.
Could be fun.
And the second one being more contentious. It's actually one of the topics you already mentioned. So
Perfect.
I think you probably both have a little bit ahead of me on this because you've already heard people talk about these things. Yeah. We'll see.
Yeah, because we have no knowledge of these topics.
No, I have not told either of you what any of these things are intentionally so that you could not prepare for it. So you're like one of those people who comes in, but not saying you haven't heard some of these
or have
thoughts and
an opinion
ideas or have plenty of opinions of your own. So that said, let's start the first one. Is the internet inherently good?
Inherently good.
Inherently good.
I would say not inherently. I think it's inherently neutral. Like a hammer when you go to Home Depot. It can be used for good or it can be used for evil. That's my starting in. That's my starting in a position.
I mean, it's a larger question of like, what is change good? Isn't change something like the internet fundamentally changed how humanity works, how it communicates, how it, people work from home. So that change always brings positives and negatives. And so, yeah, I think when we think about the internet in general, or the way we communicate across the wire, it has brought a massive change, massive positive change. It's also caused huge problems with mental illness and loneliness. And so there are things we have to manage. The negative aspects are things we have to manage, in my opinion.
Okay, the reason I thought this was kind of an interesting topic-ish, you actually kind of hit both sort of in interesting ways. Your comment is fentanyl good? I would say absolutely fucking not. I mean, yes, there is a use case that it is good, but the what it has done to us is horrifying.
Right.
So I don't think you get to say it's neutral like a hammer, because it's not just an ambient thing sitting there. We use it.
I would say fentanyl is that. I would say the internet is neutral like a hammer.
Oh, okay. Okay. Fair enough. To your point, I think I'm not sure that it has brought more good than not. I really don't know.
What's your opinion? Or if you
so I'm closer to what you said. And I've been researching a lot of Stoicism lately. And so I'm thinking about things more as being virtuous or not virtuous, as opposed to being some personal perspective of good or bad. I don't know that it has virtue. I don't know that it has given us a better place to work together. I don't think necessarily the guardrails it doesn't give us is virtuous.
That's interesting because it's like you're saying it's not virtuous. You're saying it's neutral. I think it's been a positive force in the world for progress.
I think you picked a good topic. It seems like we're landing in different spots. Yeah. I mean, I would lean more towards, now me personally, I would prefer a world that didn't have the internet to a world that is consumed by the internet. I think there's a lot of negatives that have come from it. But I know personally what that comes from is I love human interaction. I'm super extroverted. Like I love being in person. It's what gives me energy. You know, like tonight we're doing this podcast. Gives me energy. Last night he had a party at his house. That gives me energy.
I don't know why I wasn't invited, but all right.
From now on.
Yeah. It's weird because everybody was invited. It was on the internet.
I did publish it.
And random people showed up. But if I was to choose an absolute in either direction, I would choose a world without it because that's where I comfortably reside and I find power in that. And I perform better in a world with human interaction as in person. I find my persona on the internet is not as good as you might expect me to be in person. People might disagree with that, but
yeah, I mean,
my exes.
I disagree only because I think that if you look at human progress and how it's progressed and it's gotten more and more accelerated, technology, especially the technology that connects us, is a multiplier. It hasn't just added to us or taken away. It has multiplied the progress and the communication, the scientific discoveries, everything to make humanity better today than it was 20 years ago, 30 years ago.
How do you define better, though?
Yeah, and
I think from a scientific perspective.
Okay.
And it's worth just adding the caveat, and you don't think there's anything regressive that comes from that?
I'm not saying that there are no negative consequences. There is always negative consequences. You know, when the telephone was created, I have this fun, I look up the curmudgeon articles from the era when those technologies came out to look for the people who were like,
I bet that was fun.
The telephone is going to ruin us. We no longer have to write, and think about what we're writing and then wait 4 weeks for a reply. Like we just get an immediate answer and we don't, read those articles.
The people that in your head that come out of your mouth, like the
they have that accent. They have that accent.
Amazing. But transported to another time.
It's funny you say that, but isn't that kind of true? I mean, writing has gone downhill significantly.
For sure.
It's a negative consequence of the telephone and eventually the internet.
It has increased anxiety, because it used to be you write a letter and then like they could be there or they could not be there, and not getting a reply in 1 week won't make you depressed.
Right.
Where now I send Ian a text message and
30 seconds.
If it doesn't said read, like I'm like,
do you love me anymore?
I remember when ICQ first came out, like day 5 or something. I'm like really early on ICQ. I'm like, I hate this app. I don't know how to explain why I hate it, but people have the expectation that I'm going to immediately respond, but like, I don't want to.
Right.
Like, even if I am sitting here, I don't want to do that. I don't want them to have any context of when I'm online, what I'm doing. It's like this massive invasion of privacy.
Right.
And it's just like, and that was a window into the future in a way I could not possibly have understood at the time.
The tools certainly change the way we communicate, right? So having to write letters creates an environment where you must communicate a certain way. Having a telephone changed the way we communicate and the way that we expect others to communicate with us. And then the internet now has also done that.
I remember traveling overseas, and this is very early in text messaging days. From my perspective in the United States, very early. But overseas, it was well adopted because it was just more efficient, like cost-wise. And so everyone just text messaged 100% of the time. No one called. Like, it's like, this is going to cost me like $1 million. Why are you calling me? Just text me. Yeah. And so everything was very abbreviated. All the communications went down from these nice long letters that you were talking about in history down to, 100 characters with emojis.
And I do that at work too. Like someone internal in my company sends me an email. And I'm like, why are you not slacking me right now? Like, what's wrong with you? Get with the times. And it's like, because I don't have time to go read an email. Like, just send me a message. And if I respond, I'm available. If I don't respond, you can write me a thing and I'll read it later.
I saw this meme the other day where it's like I used OpenAI to create this massive email from this tiny block of text. And on the other side, the guy used ChatGPT to take it from a big block of text down to the original thought. So we've somehow gotten this weird dystopian world where we're not just saying the thing we need to say and being done with it.
Yeah, I mean, brevity, it's an interesting thing because it can be very powerful. Right? And I think a lot of it has to do with context. Like if you're trying to convey a very complex idea, brevity can be very damaging to how you are able to convey that idea, right? Like you look at the way that we ingest news. It's a 30-second soundbite. It's usually, like he said, it's one side of the conversation or the other. They're digging their heels in because they know that they only have 30 seconds. And so if I can just convince as many people to come to my side as possible in that 30 seconds, good. Whereas in conversations like this, we can have a fully developed thought. And sometimes people don't know how to do that because they're so used to like, no, I just give you the 30-second soundbite. I give you the text message with the 100 characters. I want the other side. Like I agree that there is efficiency to be had. And like earlier I talked about being 40 and I don't want to go out into the world and have to do mental gymnastics all day. I want to go out at some point and kind of know at least where I stand on most things. And this also applies to my communication. Like if I kind of don't need to be convinced or don't need to convince anybody else, I can just say a few words and that'll be it. Or I can fully develop a thought. I like to do both, but certainly the tools dictate how people tend to do those things.
You brought up a good point, and I think because I want to caveat what I say when I say like it's a positive force. Another positive force, I put it positively at least, but it's also the internet allows us to have contrast with things that were just required, like running or in-person communication. Like we do meet thinkers and drinkers because we want to have in-person and we get this massive benefit from it, but we wouldn't have realized just how beneficial that was until we got introduced to the internet.
Right.
It's like stepping in dog shit. You're like, oh, thank God normally I'm not stepping in dog shit.
Exactly.
The contrast really helps.
It does help.
Okay, fair enough.
Perspective is everything.
So there's some study, and I'm going to butcher it, but it's basically like you can only have a certain amount of meaningful relationships. I forget the number. It's like
150 or something.
Yeah,
I've
some
heard this
small-ish number,
yeah.
right? Which makes sense because that's how we grew up. Our societies were all built on these small communities. You just don't have that online. You don't. And if you try to cultivate a small group of people, it always gets kind of perverted, and someone starts like, oh, we should invite these more people, and then it grows to a thing, and you're like, okay, I'm out. Like, I just can't have the same kind of intimate conversation I was having before, and and I don't know half of you people anyway because it's the internet.
Their names,
right.
Their names. Somebody knows them. I don't know them, and I don't know how to interact with them. I don't know if they're going to get freaked out by something I'm saying or something I'm doing or whatever. I think that has silenced people. It's that I don't know how to phrase it. There's this something that's happening that's causing people to be very afraid of their own voice.
Right. Until they feel that it has gone so far that they have to speak up, and then when they do, it's like
it's just
epic.
Yeah.
The internet also,
which isn't great either.
Yeah. Right. I think what you're pointing at is another thing where in large communities, there's this winner take all thing where everybody needs a little bit of I'm the best at something or I'm good at something.
They should anyway, hopefully.
And if I'm in a small community, I could be the best woodworker. But if I'm on the internet and I watch the best woodworker in the world, I'm a pile of shit. Like I suck compared to that person. Who am I to say I'm any good? And so your mental health degrades.
Okay, I have a great story about this. So I ran hackers.org. I had about 25,000 active followers that were just like constantly hitting me, trying to find out news or whatever. And I got to the point where it didn't matter what I posted. There was always one person somewhere of 25,000 people who knew slightly more about the topic than I did.
For sure.
And so it was never just like a nice thing. It was always someone coming in like, oh, hot.
One-upping.
Coming in hot. Like, no, you don't know this weird RFC over here and this blah, blah, blah router does this weird thing. I'm like, I mean, there's no way I would have known that. Like,
Right.
you're the one expert in the world who knows a lot about this very specific thing.
He wrote the source code.
Yeah. Right?
Yeah.
So I got to the point where it actually became kind of, there was a negative associated with posting. There was never a positive. I could never do anything without having this unbelievable scrutiny. I can imagine being like a celebrity. Like I'm not going to name names, but imagine the biggest celebrities out there. There's literally, you can't post a single thing, doesn't matter what it is, without getting a massive amount of negative scrutiny.
You will be attacked.
How is that a productive, useful thing? I mean, I'm not saying there can't be any positive, but
Right.
there is so much negative that even somebody who's just a performer and just trying to make some good music, they can't even exist without having the
Strife. Yeah.
Yeah. Taylor Swift can't like fly her plane from Singapore to, without being destroyed.
Right.
I think that's a.
I think she'll be fine overall.
The most
probably.
popular person alive is getting eaten up alive.
Yeah.
Online. Okay.
I mean, but you say that. You say that she'll be fine. How do either of us know that that's true?
It's probably not true.
I bet psychologically that is a destabilizing force.
I mean, as long as she understands that it's both, right? Like the tool that gives her this kind of weird malignancy from the outside world is also the tool that brought her to the point where, I think she's the most affluent woman alive now. She's like a billionaire, multi-billionaire.
Not the most affluent, but certainly most popular right now. She was Times Woman of the Year.
Yeah, but certainly one of the most popular person of the time, right? There's a.
I barely know who we're talking about, just for reference.
Okay.
I mean,
Same. I literally don't know anything about Taylor
Yeah,
Swift
yeah.
other
So
than
ju-
she's a very famous
so I
person.
can't comment at
I
all on
like
this
her
part of the
music.
conversation.
Actually, you can, because that's what we exist for. Is you get to have your opinion.
But no,
we can talk
It's
about
an interesting caveat. Bringing it back
popularity.
to the internet thing is the fact that like the most popular person, the most popular person, the person who has the most ticket sales, who's just literally at the top of her game, had an emotional mental crisis over controversy around when I think Kanye West did something online where he took her spotlight, and she had a lot
I
of
do remember
backlash.
this.
You remember this?
Yes.
But anyway, she notably talked about it. She said this impacted me massively, and I'm like, you're rich, successful, and stuff, and it's like, how do you empathize with that? And so I have to step back a little bit. And
These are people.
yeah, because we're all people. And I look at I can have 400 positive comments on something I post on LinkedIn, and if one person says you're a fucking idiot,
It's usually me.
oh my God, I might be an idiot. I might be an idiot. It really impacts me. It does.
I just buy a bot army to do it for me.
I mean,
Negatively
that's the
downvote
only
everything.
way. The only way the people that are pushing forward and doing something positive and receiving negative flack for it, because the internet just invites it. Especially social media. The social media, if you were to ask the question, is social media inherently evil? I would say yes. Is the internet evil? No, but social media is. I think it's net negative on our entire society.
It's funny. You've bastardized my question. I didn't ask if it was evil. I asked if it was good.
If it was good. What's the difference?
Well, if it's just neutral, like you said, a hammer, I could kind of get on board with this. This is stoicism. It's a thing. I don't control it. It's just a thing that exists.
Yeah.
You and me, we control a lot of the internet, and we can make things happen like really crazy, way beyond most people what they think.
Yeah, we're hackers.
Right, but that's actually one of my problems with the idea of trying to abstract and saying I don't control things. Well, I control a lot of things. I control wildly more things than most people think I control.
My marketing team when people came to my website, I would get their information, and then I would get their information when they post something. You get a lot of information by just hacking
Yeah,
stuff.
I know, right. So if I was to say is that good? Because, okay, back in the old days when I was very first getting started on the internet, I did a lot of decloaking. I figured out how to figure out who people were. And then I realized the value of privacy. And I'm like, well, shit. I'm both sides of this exact same issue. And like big banks are hiring me to decloak people so they can, find out who the hackers are and whatever. But they're also using it to find their customers. And, there's this sort of dual use thing that's going on there. And I'm like, I don't know that I've made the world a better place. I can't justify that was all for the net benefit of society. I just can't do it.
Yeah.
I mean, there's always trade-offs. And to me, that's this kind of radical acceptance that I've gone through with lots of things is, there's, if I look out into the world and I say, let's say this thinkers thing, we can say it's a net positive, but there are negatives. Like there's going to be somebody who gets hurt, somebody that decides to, take an opinion. Somebody might kill themselves because of something they heard. Like these are all things that they're risks. But I think, do I still do it? Yeah. Because I think for me, it's beneficial. And the people that I care most about, it's beneficial. Mm-hmm. And the people that I see coming to the group, it's beneficial. And I think that applies to almost everything. Is there's always going to be a trade-off. You've got to decide for the anecdotal life that you go and live every day. Is it net positive, net negative? For me, then the internet, I don't know. I mean, my background is technology, cybersecurity stuff, so it definitely pays my bills to know how to leverage that. But could I find something else to do? Sure.
It's interesting. This topic has kind of, diverged a little bit. So I see two things forming right now, and we could take it either way. One is, is the internet good based off of the number of voices that it has added to us, crowding, the number of voices in our communities. We no longer even recognize who we're talking to anymore. And then number two is anonymity, is like, should we know who we're talking to? And there's positives to privacy. There's also, I'm like I do cybersecurity, so I'm like I work for privacy, but I do thinkers and drinkers because I hate talking to people that are behind a mask. I think privacy online destroys human contact. It's a net negative for me that I don't know who you are and that you can just do whatever you want without consequence. And like 4chan is a perfect example. It's just a cesspool of people who have no consequences. You get to say whatever they want to say.
Okay, well, let's narrow it down to a little bit. You say it's a cesspool. Is it good?
Is it good?
4chan specifically?
Yeah.
I don't know. What I guess
is
the
it
question,
virtuous?
Should it exist? Yes. Is it good? No.
So it's not
Agree with
virtuous.
that.
For me, for my opinion.
Yeah, I'm not saying censor it.
Yeah, what's
I'm
the
not-
greater good
Yeah.
that it serves? But I think people have to suss that out for themselves. Like you can find yourself, like, I don't know, anything you name out there, you can be like, well, this works for me and it's entertaining, or it's a place where I just absorb
but
thousands of minutes of my day.
Many things are entertaining. I mean, just doing a big old huge line of some drug could be very entertaining. Is it virtuous? Is it improving our life?
Usually the chosen drug to do in lines would be cocaine, I think. We don't need to anonymize that one, I guess.
Well, it could be other things too.
True.
And my point being, like, I don't think we get to call it a hammer. I don't think it's that simple. I think it's having incredibly complicated, deep, penetrating aspects to our lives.
For sure.
All over the place.
Yeah. That's the cool thing about subjectiveness. And like, we talked about the Overton window earlier. What is acceptable thought? And it's like, there's a whole lot of culture war happening over things that are not in their acceptable thought that they want to be acceptable. Like, talking about gender outside of binary is this strong cultural war happening right now. It's like, we should normalize being outside the norm, and there's this big, strong fight over that. And so, and then the counterculture to that is like, is there value in having acceptable thought? Is there value in having, this is our set of acceptableness that we all accept as a community? Like, is there value in that at all?
And it's become harder to do that because of how widespread and how global we are now. It's very hard to find consensus on what that acceptable thought is.
If you just expanded the Overton window to infinity and said everything's acceptable to talk about, like, would it be better? Would that be good?
probably good, virtuous, in the virtuous sense of good. I don't know that there wouldn't be negative consequences.
It wouldn't be a functioning society, I don't think.
Right.
I don't know. I don't know if it wouldn't. I think it might sort itself out because it's okay to talk about it. Doesn't mean it's okay to do.
Like, is taboo useful?
Having useful knowledge that is not actually applied, is that useful? Yeah, I think it is. I am a very, very good bad guy. Am I a bad guy? No. I mean, not statistically speaking, not the amount of bad things I've done in my life versus good things. Yeah. So I think it's okay that I know how to do a lot of really terrible things so that I can help people, try to stop people from doing terrible things to them.
And that's such a subjective thing because, like, you're arsenic. Like, you could do really terrible things.
I could.
But I think of you as a really good person.
Yeah, thank you.
You know,
thank you.
It's a weird dichotomy.
but knowing it, I think, is useful, and I think gifting it to people is useful, so that they know. Like lockpicking is a really good example. They use it at conferences all the time. I'll teach someone how to pick a lock or whatever. I taught Jeremiah's daughter how to pick a lock, for instance. Yeah. It's very useful to know that isn't actually the thing that will save you. You have to do a lot more. Mm-hmm. That's knowledge. It's very useful. I think having that knowledge is very useful. Yeah. But I will say there is truly negative knowledge out there. There's things that just burrow into your brain and are not necessarily ever going to provide you any value.
What's an example of that?
Well, I have personally witnessed child pornography, for instance. Personally. Like my eyeballs have seen it.
I've done investigations on it. It's terrible.
And
you can only do it so long. You have to step aside.
It's like straight up instantaneous PTSD. Like you can't just unsee.
Right.
And I'm not going to go into very horrible, gruesome details, but this is like the worst of the thing you could possibly imagine, wrapped up in a bow of more horrible things. And then I just painted it with a horrible painting on the outside. Just shitty people doing horrible things. I don't think that knowledge is a good thing to just hand to anybody. That is a privileged piece of knowledge that once you see it, you can't unsee it. Your life is fucked.
Right.
And that's okay if you've gotten some amount of indoctrination ahead of time for how horrible it's going to be. It's still surprising. It's not like you're like, oh, it'll be okay. Nope.
Yeah.
It sure fucking isn't. But I do think on the whole, at least having the conversation is net positive. What I worry about, just to be clear, is let's say there is a new populist thing that occurs somewhere overseas, whatever. And then once upon a time, no, it's useful. The word overseas is a useful thing here because once upon a time, it would have to be in a letter. That letter would have to have made it to
a manifesto.
It's like somebody on a horse, and that someone on a horse had to race it across a countryside and had to evade, bad guys who wanted to steal their mail or whatever because it might have valuables in it, and then had to get on a boat, and then that boat had to like broker deals with the yacht with the
like shipping companies,
the shipping companies and stuff, and then they had to evade pirates, and then they had to travel thousands of miles, and then all that stuff in reverse for you to get a letter. That idea can now get in your brain in split second. That I'm not sure is so good because we're talking about there's no buffer there. There's no risk associated with it. It's
massive scope creep of your life. Like I don't need to worry about, like I never would have worried about things that are happening outside of my community before, like until we got newspapers, and then I'm like maybe looking at something's happening in Washington D.C. that I can be concerned about. But why? Does it really affect me? I don't know. We can have that conversation. But I agree with you. I think that if you talk about like Israel, Ukraine right now, why do I care? Personally, I would argue I don't. I would argue most people don't, but they feel like they have to have an opinion. Some of them more well formulated than others, and they feel like they have to pick a side, and they have to feel like, and that's like one random thing that 100 years ago they never would have even It's
would have been a
toxic
far off
and it
war
poisons.
back in the day.
I think it poisons you, right? Because there's lots of bad news in the world. If you start looking around the world, there's lots of bad news. It's kind of the way it is, probably the way it's always going to be, and probably the way it's always been. I think it poisons you. It poisons your meat. Makes your meat taste weird.
It is interesting because, yes, this stuff does penetrate further, wider, faster. You know, a statement like that or a populism message gets to people faster and poisons them faster. But we have to remember that in 1930s, populism still poisoned the masses.
With radio, which was instantaneous.
Okay, well, true. Okay. I retract everything I was about to say. Touché, sir. Touché.
I'm not trying to win a fight here, but I'm actually on the fence on this one. I'll be honest. I'm kind of pretty in the center. I think there's a lot of amazing things that have happened, a lot of ingenuity. I think AI revolution will be both terrifyingly bad if it's not handled well, and also probably great. And I wrote an entire book on why it could go very, very poorly, which I just gave you a pre-release to. What I am concerned about, though, is we don't even know if the ideas that we're getting are good or bad. There's no filter to decide if they're good or bad. I don't have a rubric to know. Like, I'll give you an example. I do some work with some people overseas, and they're pretty wealthy people. Like, you would notice the amount of zeros on the end of this one. Yeah. And they're like, we don't want anyone to know we exist, because over here, if anyone knows, like in the United States, if you're a billionaire, it's great. Like, everyone's like, holy crap, they're a billionaire, like, good to go. And like, we want to have meetings with you, a captain of industry. Over there, it's like, what crimes have you committed to get there?
Yeah. You shouldn't exist.
You shouldn't exist.
Right. Yeah.
And now, is that an idea that we want to propagate across the world? That you shouldn't exist? Like, you literally should be killed? What about a different thing? Like you mentioned the conflict in the Middle East. What if Jews shouldn't exist? Is that something that we want propagating at the speed of light everywhere?
Because this is being published? No.
But you could make an argument that, yes, we want the open borders of information. We want information to be free. We want there to be a stage for good and bad ideas to vote on. And yes, it's worth us all piling on that terrible idea. Or is it worth me buying a botnet and having millions of bots say, nope, I don't like this very good idea?
Right.
Yeah. The availability of information, it's weird for the podcast medium. I don't get it like Google who said this, but I remember a statement that said, like, when the internet was first introduced, the mass availability of information to everybody was going to solve a lot of our problems. And it turns out that didn't happen.
It solved some problems.
It solved some problems.
But like now,
but it also created just as many others.
But like possibly. Now, I mean, like I used to work in a unit with a bunch of people whose primary job was to delete information from the internet, particularly terrorist training videos. Like, their entire job was deleting terrorist videos and making sure they did not get published and making sure the source file was deleted. They were hackers. That's their entire job. And I'm like, as a person who values information and doesn't value censorship, how do I feel about that? That's a complex opinion.
It sure is.
Look, I still don't know where I fall on that.
Right? Is censorship good or bad? I don't know. I mean, because I guess what it comes down to is, if you say the internet is unvirtuous or whatever, let's turn it off. Let's get rid of it. Let's all get our pitchforks, and
which won't happen. But
you'd be surprised how easy it is to turn off the internet, my friend.
I don't want you to try.
Sometimes it kind of almost happens by accident.
AT&T just happened.
But let's say we decide it's bad, but isn't that what I'm really saying is just censor? But I don't think that's really what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that buffer zone, that tribal way of living where things slowly percolated out, had some value. There was something interesting, inherently useful about the delay that it caused, where this idea just can't, it's like, this is a terrible idea. Let's throw it away. Like, I don't want to. I don't want to.
I don't have the time to deal with this idea
and try to elicit 1 million people to go immediately have a decision on one way or another. You can't do it back then. It's just literally not possible.
Yeah.
maybe you could do it hundreds or thousands at a time, but you're not nowhere near millions, and certainly not instantaneously. Mm-hmm. Where a botnet, I could do that, 10 million, 100 million, no problem. I could do it in 5 minutes, no problem.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily think that has netted us a full positive on the other side of it.
Mm-mm. I think the swinging of a public opinion by having bots has weaponized this hammer that you talk about. It's a neutral hammer. It's this thing that's positive and
negative. Let's not talk about assault hammers. That's a totally different topic.
But if you build a botnet to go sway public opinion towards something, you have weaponized
the hammer.
Internet. You've weaponized the hammer. You've hit someone over the head with it. How do we counter that? That's like, whether it's good or bad alone, he's right. Like, it is a hammer and it can be used for good and evil, and there are people using it for evil. So, in essence,
do you retract the capability completely based on the fact that someone can use it? Like when where was I at? Oh, so I want to say I was at Home Depot or Lowe's, and the axes were like under lock and key. You couldn't just go and snag an axe off the. Mm-hmm. You have to go and find an associate to open, because
a trusted associate,
obviously,
because apparently those are dangerous things. But there's like so many things in Lowe's that you could literally kill someone with so quickly.
Every aisle.
Like, the pneumatic nail guns are not under lock and key. It's going to take me a little bit more time to put it together and turn the pump on or whatever. But like, there's so much in there that I could just like literally maim and destroy people's bodies.
Okay. Time, we're at our half hour, but a very random aside. One time, my buddy and I were trying to buy bullets in the middle of the night at Walmart because we were going to go shooting the next day. Yeah. So it was the last time we had to buy bullets. And like, you can't buy it after a certain hour,
because you're going to go use it to kill somebody at this hour.
Right. Yeah. And I'm like, okay, so can we buy rope and some plastic tarps and like, as if we're going to kill this person, right? And they're like,
tub of lye.
Yeah, you can buy all of those things. Like, okay, well, then I guess what you're saying doesn't matter very much.
Yeah.
Anyway. So that was great, gentlemen. Yeah. Thank you for doing that.
And that did have the look and feel of what you would expect to find.
Honestly, that's how Thinkers and Drinkers rolls.
Yeah.
Okay,
especially cool. as we've had a drink or two.
That's good. Okay, the second one, which you have actually already mentioned, so you're in good shape, I think, and you probably have already thought about it anyway, was the abortion debate. Huh? So, is abortion ethical?
Ethical.
I mean, that is a hard thing, because it's one of those things is like everybody draws a line somewhere else. And when you test them on it, a lot of times it kind of falls apart when you ask them.
Yeah.
Because there's going to be situations where like lots of people can say, hey, abortion 100% is not good. You should never happen. Okay, well, what if the person was raped?
Okay, well, actually, let's pause slightly just to set the stage a little bit. This might be worth doing, and we won't count this against the time. Number one, I think caveat emptor, we are not women.
100%.
Okay.
100%.
And JC, I don't think you
recognized.
You don't qualify as a woman, right?
That is correct.
Okay. So therefore, we don't have any direct like personal stake in this game, which I think is useful information.
It is useful. Yeah.
I think it's also worth mentioning some of the stats just going into it so that we're all even playing field.
Before you say that, is it even acceptable for us to have an opinion on this? And I think the answer is yes.
Well, we have one, so
we do have
whether
one.
it's acceptable or not.
I've heard it takes two to tango.
Yeah,
that's.
So I've heard the argument that men shouldn't have an opinion.
Okay,
and
I could maybe steel man that. I could go with that.
Yeah. Okay, but let's pause that one. Mm-hmm. I'm willing to talk about it, but let's just pause it temporarily. Okay, so this is coming from the CDC. Just so we're all talking the same thing at the same time. Who knows if it's accurate or not? But it is the CDC. Abortion surveillance system in 2021, 625,978 legal induced abortions were reported by the CDC in 48 reporting areas. I don't know why it's 48 as opposed to 50. Maybe there's 2 states that don't report. So you'd have to.
Which state is this?
This is the CDC Center of
so national.
Yeah, national. Yep.
Yeah.
Disease control. And this is in 2021, so a couple of years back. It was an increase of 5% from 2020. 2020 had a particularly low amount of people being born around that time frame just because of COVID. That does not account for abortions that are not considered legal. It's a different category of things. So there's some amount more than that. Women in their 20s accounted for more than half the abortions at 57%. Nearly all abortions in 2021 took place in early gestation, which was 93.5%. So almost everybody were performed at less than or equal to 13 weeks gestation. A smaller number of abortions, 5.7%, were performed at 14 to 20 weeks, and even fewer, 0.9, were performed at greater than 21 weeks. So I think that's, okay, that's the state. That's the state of the state.
And I think like a topic like this, so if I were to be a facilitator at Thinkers and Drinkers on the abortion debate,
you are.
And I would be, I have to caveat, like you already said it once, is like we're all men. So like, should we even be talking about it?
Hell yes.
Yes, we should talk about it.
Everyone
We should have an opinion.
Everyone should talk.
Now, will our opinion and will our conversation differ if we had women here and if we had an equal number of women here? I think the answer is yes. Some of the features.
For me, no.
Maybe. But I mean, some of the things that I would bring up in a Thinkers and Drinkers topic, if it was an equal men and women topic, there are things I would be looking out for that would be different, because the emotional elevation of a woman who has gone through it or has heard of it or has been traumatized by it or has been traumatized by the decision of a court, like in Texas, by it, that emotional elevation will be greater than what us three will have.
Fair enough. But there's enough of people I care about who have ovaries and, the right equipment, who are listening to this, that I am the same way now as I would be off camera.
Sure. Right. Sure.
So this is actually my unfiltered, real opinion. And it has been this whole time, literally for the last year. But
we're starting from the premise. We're going to have this conversation with the fact that we are allowed to have opinions as men. We're allowed to discuss the complexities of it. I will say I will be less emotional than, say, a woman who is being forced to carry a child.
True. Yeah, we don't have every opinion in the room.
Right.
100%.
But yeah, I mean, I think
so with
all
that,
that's true.
With that said, can we start now?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So, all right, go ahead.
Yeah, with all of our caveats.
Well, I think it was worth saying, because if I don't say it, people go, hey. And
right.
There it is.
And I think what's nice about conversations like this, if you go in and you do assume good intent, right? Like, regardless of the topic, like, I can have an opinion on it. It may not be well informed, but that's for you to figure out. Like, ultimately, like, I still get to have an opinion. On this specific thing, what was the original question again?
Is it ethical?
Is it ethical? Is abortion ethical? I would say I could go either direction. Honestly, I'm going to pick the center ground again.
No. Pick. Come
neutral.
on.
He's too neutral.
I'm pretty neutral.
So pick your actual whatever you want.
A caveat: me and him, we don't have children.
Side story as well. I always like to be the centrist, right? Until I see the room moving in a direction where I kind of feel like there is an opinion that probably needs to be out there, because it is one that's reasonably realistic.
I want you to have your opinion. Come on.
I have an opinion.
Okay. What is it?
And right in the center. So I would tend to say I'm more pro-life. Like I like, certainly if I kind of have a nice weekend and things go well, and then things are, I don't want a child. Yeah. And so if the technology is available and I can say within the context of my reality, it's humane enough where I'm okay with it, I'm fine.
Okay.
Mine's a complex opinion, because I do think it's unethical. But I do currently fight for the right for a woman to choose.
Interesting.
I fight for the legal right for them to choose, because I can't make the decision for them. I think it's a disgusting practice, personally.
Yeah.
I think it's kind of weird. Like, there's a lot of things that go into that opinion. So it's like, it's weird because I think it's kind of weird. I think it's a weird opinion, a weird practice. I think it's probably unethical. And I'm currently fighting for the right for a woman to choose it, and they should be able to, because I cannot see myself ethically being able to force a woman to carry.
Interesting.
And you?
I'm going to reserve what I think until you guys convince me or we come to consensus.
Okay.
But I will tell you interesting things. For example, a very close friend of mine, her daughter is going through IVF right now. And it's one of the craziest stories I've ever heard.
She doesn't live in Alabama, does she?
No, this is actually a situation you might find yourself in, right? Someone you care about. So she goes in. She has the IVF done. They do the DNA test afterwards, make sure everything's good to go. It turns out she's a Caucasian woman. This is a Chinese child. So one of two things happened. They completely fucked up and put someone else's baby into her, or it's something just not that bad, like they totally fucked up the lab. Now, the least bad thing is medical malpractice. The worst thing is now she has this baby that isn't hers. Is she allowed to abort this thing?
Yes.
Edge cases are very hard.
It turns out,
Unless she's in Alabama.
absolutely no, because it's not her property.
It's a human life.
Yeah.
It is property,
Sweet.
which is even weirder. I'm telling you, there are these very weird edge cases that exist
Yeah.
that push my, like, is this ethical or not, to a weird
Yeah, and I have a
degree.
personal experience with a edge case because when the law in Texas was passed to ban abortion,
The SB8.
SB8, I had, at the time, had a frozen embryo, fertilized embryo frozen with the Austin Fertility Clinic.
Mm-hmm.
And when that law was passed and abortion was illegal, I was paying $100 a month to keep it frozen. If I stopped paying, did I abort the thing? Am I liable?
Interesting.
If I stop paying and the clinic disposes of it or stops freezing it, did they commit an abortion? That's an edge case. It's a fucking weird edge case.
It is in the SB8, because SB8 requires that the woman misses her period as the day that they begin the clock.
Was that true? Okay.
Yeah.
When it was brought up to me, it was a gray area they hadn't quite thought about.
Yeah.
Because certainly
But either
senators
way,
didn't think about
but
that.
either way, it is interesting because what you're basically saying is life begins at fertilization, which, by the way, is in SB8, but the clock doesn't start until, because maybe they thought of that. I'm not sure, but
These lines are the debate is so much on this line. Where is the line?
It's one thing to have an opinion on it and think about it in the gray matter of our heads. It's a whole other thing to litigate, right? And to decide and say X, Y, and Z and put linear kind of lines to be able to qualify and or litigate those kinds of things. Because the reason I brought up Alabama twice is because I guess they just passed a law that says embryos are humans. And so I think the underlying case was that some random person like broke into the whatever the lab is where they keep embryos and like walked into the lab and grabbed one of the glass beakers or whatever there is there, and it was frozen and freezer burned their hand and they dropped it and the embryo died. And so the parents of those they were like, this is murder. Like, you murdered our unborn child. And I guess that was like what, to me, this is mental gymnastics. Like,
It is mental
To an
gymnastics, but
amazing
like
degree.
me, so like this is maybe TMI for the internet, which we're publishing.
it's okay. It's just the internet.
You know, like I was in a state when I froze that embryo, like we were having trouble conceiving, you know, and so it's interesting that like if someone had destroyed the embryo that we struggled to create,
how would you
I would
feel?
have been fucking furious.
Yeah.
That would have been murder in my eyes. Like my emotions in that state would have been, you murdered my child. And so for me, when I think about abortion, it's like, yeah, in that case, it would have been that emotional state.
Interesting.
Because it was so hard to even create this thing.
I think that's another weird case for IVF. So imagine you're a woman, and now you are forced to carry someone else's baby that you don't even know who this person is. In fact, the company who accidentally switched the embryos, they may not know who this person is. Like, it might be that messed up.
Seems like their record keeping might be a little bit suspect.
Yeah.
Overall.
By the way, I did a bunch of research on this just to make absolutely sure this is a real thing when it happened. Not for this podcast, just as it happened. I'm like, what? Is this a thing that occurs? And it occurs all the time. This is a fairly common thing. Usually they find out after they're born and they look completely different than the parents.
Yeah.
That's usually how they find out. But in this very weird case, which is the weirdest case I've ever heard, they potentially have found out 8 months or something before the baby's born. Now, 8 months of her life is going to be spent gestating someone else's baby that she cannot unwind. Now, in her case, her family's, pretty religious, I would say. They're not going to abort it no matter what. It's just not going to happen.
Right.
But what if he just, straw man here, what if she had wanted to?
Yeah. Yeah. It's so hard.
Dude, it's so hard. It's so hard. This is why it's a big complex problem, because people like to simplify it at the extremes.
Right.
Like, this is as simple as murder versus slavery. Those are the two arguments. It's either you're enslaving women or you're killing life. And for me,
Which are both true.
yeah, which it's
At
weird.
the core of it, they're both true.
How do you compete
mutually.
against life and freedom? Those are the two most fundamental things that we love, that we care for. We want life and freedom. And then you put them together and you force them to fight. Who wins?
Yeah.
And so you have to make a separate argument. Oh, well, it's not actually life. It's just a couple of cells. Then the argument goes away.
For a while, and then it restarts again. So there's something called the quickening, which I had not heard this word before.
It's from Highlander.
It really feels like it should be.
It's when they cut the heads off the other person.
Yep.
Google it. The quickening.
Which is around 12 weeks, and that's when the body of the child starts moving. It's when the very first time the mother can kind of feel it moving inside of her, apparently. What the hell do I know? And so a lot of people say, well, that's when it is
A life.
a life.
Yeah.
Or they'll say when it has a heartbeat, because when it has a heartbeat, they'll say because the chances are it can survive.
Viable.
Yeah, it's viable at that point.
And this is the crux of the issue, is when we say life versus freedom, there's no winning that argument. What is, some people say, like, give me liberty or give me death. Freedom obviously wins. Some people say, like, no, life, regardless, because everyone's a little bit of a slave forever, so everybody has an opinion on that.
What do you mean by that?
Slave to the system, man.
Yeah, slave to the system. Like, we're all slave to our job. We have to work for money.
Okay,
Got to keep the lights on, man.
Yeah. So the interesting thing is sometimes this debate revolves around this definition of life, because then we don't have to do the life versus freedom argument. Then we can say, well, freedom obviously wins the not life argument because it's not alive. So we try to solve this whole debate by saying, well, life doesn't start till heartbeat.
Right.
Life doesn't start till insemination. Life doesn't start till first breath.
But the underlying cause is, like, everybody gets to have an opinion of what that is and gets to formulate their own opinion, and finding consensus is pretty hard. I think what's interesting is having this conversation here versus having it in Denver, like, and to move this out into the meta, and we can go back into it again, is it, like, kind of navigating the idea that everybody gets to have an opinion on this, and whatever their lived experience is going to drive what that opinion is, and wherever that their thoughts or their beliefs come from, it's all, I don't get to audit that, right? So for me, it's interesting because in Denver, you're going to find consensus pretty quickly. Like, everybody's super pro choice. Like, just that's just the way it is.
Texas is pretty 50-50 in my group's demographic, at least.
Yeah. So for me, I actually take the opposing opinion and say, well, what is it, like, can we at least understand the basis that these folks are saying, I think life is precious and I think it's fundamentally beautiful and I want to protect it. Is that reasonable? And most people say, yeah, that's totally reasonable. But and I think you're right. The conversation is both, the slavery and the life thing. It does conflict. Yeah.
You know, sometimes the debate over when does life begin, sometimes it misses the fact that there's an entire set of pro-choice people who believe even if this was the living embodiment of the most important person alive, like literally Mozart composing our most important music, if they were latched to a woman and said he's only alive because he's using you, there are still people who will say you're not allowed to make her do that. And so even if the life began at conception, there's still an argument to be made. You can't force her to do it.
Okay, so I historically have hung out with very leftist people through my college career, hackers and whatever. There's a lot of very, very left-leaning people. So it wasn't until I started hanging with more right-leaning people that the first time I ever even heard a competitive viewpoint towards this. And meeting women for the first time who were like, ugh, no, I'm not going to, like, I don't believe in any of that shit. Like, I really think life matters, like, a lot to me. And, like, I would never do that. And they can't even conceive of the idea. My brain kind of opened up to the idea. But it wasn't until I saw a conversation. It was a guy, obviously. He's a very trolly guy. But he's talking with this woman, and it was actually a pretty civil conversation, but I was surprised because he's a total troll. He said, look, are you saying that life begins the second the baby's crowning? Is that what you're saying? Because I feel like maybe like 10 seconds before, you know, if you had cut the woman open and delivered the baby, it would still have lived. It's like, okay, well, and she agreed. So he's like, okay, so working backwards, there's some point at which the baby would have survived outside the womb. So you're saying, call that 20 something weeks or something. So maybe that's it, or maybe it's one day before that, or maybe it's one day before that. Now, I just don't know how many days before that. And I'm like,
it's all turtles all the way down.
But that was a compelling argument. I actually understood what he was doing there. I mean, he's a complete troll. He was really trying to bait her, but it was an interesting conversation because she took pause, and she's very left. She's all the way, you know, like pegging the needle left. And she even said, you know what? I understand what you're saying. I actually agree with you, believe it or not. And she's like, I know you're right wing. He's like, I'm not. What do you mean I'm right wing? I'm not. I'm like a libertarian. I actually am very left. I just don't think that you understand this position. So he's fighting her on this detail. And she ended up kind of pausing and like going, well, maybe there is more to this than I thought. And I'm like, if this extraordinarily left person can do this, so can I. So I took a pause and started thinking about it. Now, one thing that I think is useful to bring up is the smoking while you're pregnant thing. I think most people would like want to slide tackle that woman and take the cigarette right out of her hand or whatever. Like someone who's pregnant, visibly pregnant, let's say, shooting up or something. Yeah. Like, what the fuck are you doing? You're going to fuck up that kid. With all the intentions of delivering the kid, you're fucking up the kid. They call it the kid.
It's a good angle.
And that is where I stopped being fully on the left on this issue. Because if you can't see that as a child, knowing how unbelievably fucked and what horrible position you're putting that child in the future, and it is a child one day from now,
right,
or 1 week or 1 month or whatever, I have a hard time saying that's not a kid at that point. If you can't tell me that's not a kid because your instinct is that it is a kid,
yeah.
I think there's something incongruent there, and that's what bugs me.
And that's, you know, and this is, I bring this up because often in thinkers and drinkers conversations, when we're just three dudes at a table talking, drinking, talking about this topic, it's like maybe a scientist might be like, it's a completely different topic.
Sure.
We're not even talking about that.
Yeah.
But like for us, it's like, well, it's an interesting angle. It's like, we talk about this potential as being human, or like, you know, if you end a life, they never have a chance to suffer. But if you smoke and they become a human and they have to live an entire life with the consequence of the smoking, this isn't even an abortion debate anymore. This is a smoking while pregnant debate.
True.
But where do you draw that line? Right?
That's the problem.
If you get to protect the child from the mother who is going to smoke or drink while pregnant, why would you then not also extend that same courtesy for other situations?
Like literally killing them if they're a human, right?
This comes down to so one of my favorite authors, Jonathan Haidt. Haidt.
Is that
Jonathan
Thinking
Haidt.
Fast and Slow?
I don't think he wrote that one, but he wrote about the Rider and the Elephant. But he wrote a book about morality. He wrote The Coddling of the American Mind. That was one of his later ones. Great author.
Very good book.
But he wrote on the 5 pillars of morality, and he said in left liberal Western thought, like European American Western liberal thought, most people think of morality as the principle of harm. What is causing the least harm? Smoking that produces a child that suffers for 90 years with the consequence of your smoking causes a lot of harm. Abortion that ends the suffering now is less harm. So on that morality pillar of harm, we're producing less harm by ending the life before it becomes a life. But it's before it becomes a life, I'm making a choice that's going to cause 90 years of suffering. It doesn't pass the sniff test on the principle of harm, of morality.
Okay, this is where it's worth talking about. So there's Donahue-Levitt hypothesis, which is that there's a positive effect on crime by virtue of having abortions, because women who have abortions tend to be single family, single parent rather, and they tend to be in low income demographics, and therefore the children end up becoming criminals, career criminals in some cases.
I've heard about this. It was
talking about like averages.
It was like 20 years after Roe v. Wade got passed.
Christopher Foote and Christopher Goetz also had another theory, so there was somebody in the middle, I can't remember who it was, who basically said they did a statistical thank you, error, which basically caused them to overcount in certain areas. And then there was another group that said that it was a leaded gasoline problem that caused this thing and had nothing to do with abortions. So I think that there's, whether it's true or not, I mean, I'm not here to argue the merits. I have not looked at the data, but I will say that there is a greater social good in one way or another. If you want to quantify a life, are we willing to quantify it before they're born? Is that what we're talking about? Because that's kind of what you just said, and that's kind of what all of this math is. It's like, well, what kind of person are they going to become? Well, you just kind of decided that they're human and that they have value, and you don't like their value.
Right.
And that's a little weird to me.
You know what changed my mind about abortion?
I have no idea.
It's sci-fi.
Oh, yeah?
Okay.
I don't even remember the story. I think it was like a short story I read on like some Reddit post. But anyway, there was this story. I forgot. I really wish I remembered, because it's such an interesting thought experiment. If we were to go to a planet that had these weird rock formations, they look like eggs, and it was made of a material that was highly useful for us to create a civilization on this new planet and to live. Well, it turns out the thing we've been harvesting are just eggs that take 100 years to gestate. And 100 years after we've colonized, and the only way our civilization lives is by harvesting these things, these eggs, they become these magnificent creatures of the only other life we know. There is going to be a question. Should we be harvesting these eggs that we now know become these majestic beasts that take 100 years to gestate and are very rare? And if we continue to harvest them so that our civilization can live, we will make them extinct. And it was just a sci-fi thought experiment.
It's a thought experiment.
And it was interesting to me, because it was like, are they alive or not had nothing to do with it. It's whether we were going to make this fucking species extinct.
I don't know. I feel like
we need to live.
You conflated it a little bit by saying they're majestic beasts.
Maybe.
I think we can all agree that no matter who
maybe there were evil beasts that kill us.
Yeah, no matter who the humans are, it's a 50-50 split. You might just get a giant asshole, or the next John Mayer, which I kind of like John Mayer personally. Although most people would say he's an asshole.
A planet that produces John Mayers.
Right. They're all just John Mayers. But he did apparently break Taylor Swift's heart, which I think turns a large population against him.
Not acceptable.
This does happen at Think and Drinks too. We drink a lot. Sometimes
we go way off topic.
All right. So I would say that to answer your question, like where do I stand? Because you wanted to nail me down on it. I think I'm slightly more on the I don't feel comfortable with it, but obviously there's these horrible situations like the mother gets, the cord wrapped around a internal organ or whatever the hell, and she's going to die.
Life of the mother.
She's going to die. So the SB8, for instance, is okay with the life of the mother. That's a carve out that's okay. Rape and incest. In the same way, this IVF thing, like carrying somebody else's baby, that I'm way on the other side of. So I end up being much more on the left, like, oh, are you kidding me? Are you really going to force this
her,
issue?
Yeah, to carry trauma.
And how do you prove that this happened? And there's all these caveats. And so I end up ever so slightly on the right to choose. But man, it is gross. And I don't like anything about this topic.
Yeah.
It is... But I got to tell you, I just don't think that most people are doing the ethical exercise to make sure that it is actually the right decision.
Okay.
Yeah. Can I ask the question? Let's do it around the world.
Okay.
We all stated our opinion on how we feel about abortion.
Yes.
To what degree, how strongly do we feel about this? And second question is, do we feel like with new information or personal information with, say maybe a woman we love, would we be open to change? Like, how strongly do you feel?
You want to go first?
Yeah, I mean, I don't feel that strongly. I think you kind of hit me on the head when you said, like, I don't reserve the opinion. Like, I have an opinion. If people ask me for it, I'll give it. But I would never, like, project that out into the world trying to convince others that my opinion is correct, mainly because I don't have the contextual, like, personal experience that drives that. I would prefer between myself and someone else that I loved to have the choice, but also I can get behind the other side of it. As far as getting, if I was personally involved in that, like if I was to quantify, I'm probably pro-choice at this point, and then I don't know what personal experience would kind of push me to the other side. Other than I agree with you, it is gross and it's weird and it's uncomfortable to think about ending a life. Maybe I could probably be pushed to the other side. I'm pretty pliable as a general rule anyway.
Yeah. I think for me, again, my opinion was that I do have a internal gut reaction that it's a wrong act. But I will fight for the right that they exist. And that the woman has the right to choose. I fight for that right because I don't feel like we have the right to force her. At the same time, my opinion isn't enough for me to carry a flag and march for it. Like my opinion is like even my reaction, my negative reaction to the thought of having an abortion. Like when I heard a woman say positively, yeah, you should definitely do it. It's fine. It's completely okay. Like if you ask like a Planned Parenthood person and they're like, yeah, you should definitely do it. It's just fine. It's just a clump of cells. I have a negative gut reaction to that. Positive thinking. Is that informed by science? Is that informed by a very strong opinion? Probably not. But it is what my current opinion is. So I guess as a man, as someone who won't have to go through it myself, it isn't a strong opinion.
Yeah, you qualified it, man. You broke the rule.
Yeah, I do qualify it because it isn't. If I was a woman, I would probably have a stronger opinion.
Maybe.
I think so.
Maybe. Who knows, right? I'm sure there's people in the middle.
Yeah.
I land that I have to think about somebody I care about, right? Somebody I care about going through this incredibly shitty situation that they don't want to be in, right? Otherwise, why are we talking about this problem?
Right.
They don't want to do it, but it's a thing that they are forced into for some reason from their perspective, right? let's say it's rape. Like, get fucking rid of it. Like, be rid of that asshole. Like, I just can't imagine advocating for a rapist to force her to carry this child.
Yeah.
Like, I can't imagine trying to convince her of that.
Right.
I don't think I could do it.
What's the greater good there?
And that's an acknowledgement of the woman's rights and her personal being, right?
No. It is an imagination of what her brain must be thinking. It is truly empathetic, which I'm not sure is
towards her, not the child.
Correct. Yes. That's correct. Yes. I don't think I can fully put myself in her position, but if she's crying her eyes out, I'm just going to have to go with, this is a really terrible situation, right? Incest, same thing, right? Her personal life, if she's going to die, there's someone I care about, like I actually give a shit about this person, I cannot see, like, sorry, you're out. This thing has got to be existing and you die immediately, gone. I can't imagine myself saying that in that situation. Everything other than that, I have a bit of a hard time putting myself in a situation where I'm like, no, really, this, or the IVF thing is another example, where there's some weirdness, right? But anything other than that, I'm having a hard time putting myself in that situation where I'm going to go, yep, go ahead and just dump it. You know, it's a clump of cells. Like, I'm not. Are you smoking? Are you smoking right now? Because I just can't see saying that's okay.
Right.
I think you're fucking up that kid, and that's when I say that's a kid. When that's what's going through my mind, I feel like that's the part where I just can't get over it. So what the fuck do I know? I'm a guy, you know.
Well, we just had a conversation. I don't hate any of you.
We should. I mean, it's 30 minutes in. We should be canceled.
Yeah.
So this is it. We did it, right?
Yep.
What just happened? What did we do?
I think we were three individuals who had a good conversation about something that
people
was
think
worth
about.
talking about.
Worth talking about. Yeah. And here's the deal. Here's the sales pitch. We talked about the 5-minute pitch. No, I'm just kidding. What I find interesting is, number one, this is an important thing. This is an important aspect of human life is to be able to have these conversations in an open space and be able to hear people's stories, understand where people come from, see their perspective and anecdotes, and that is super important. I think it's pivotal to how we communicate as humans. Like, going back to the internet thing, that was a good segue, because I think this is literally why we started this group, was to kind of combat the new way people communicate, which is literally just like this. Looking people in the eyes, you know, there's got to be some chemical, like pheromones or whatever in the room to understand. You can kind of feel tension when there's tension, et cetera, and so forth. That's important. I think we lost touch with that over time. But the other thing which was an output of this group, which I never expected, was that this group produced like the most fantastically amazing groups of people to go and do anything, not just have the conversation. And so in 2018, so we started in 2014 in San Antonio. I moved out of San Antonio in 2016, moved to Stuttgart, Germany, and started one there. And in 2018, I was like, I kind of want to go like travel and stuff, but I don't like doing anything alone. Like I said, I'm super extroverted. I don't want to do anything alone. So I was like, what if we just post this on Meetup in those two regions and see how many people we can pay us to go with us? And literally it was 20 people. So we had originally bought a villa for 8 people, and that filled up within like 2 weeks. People had paid deposits. And we're like, well, let's just get the one across the street. And so we took 20 people to Ibiza. And that trip was one of the most remarkable weeks of my life. Like, it was life-changing for me. It was life-changing for other people that came on the trip, and they made sure to tell me that.
How so? Why?
Because it's a risk, right? Like, you can go to a place, let's say you and your loved one go to a place, and it's like, okay, yeah, we went to Paris and we saw the Eiffel Tower, and it was whatever. But it's a risk to show up with strangers. Like, and most of the people that came on that trip were strangers for each other. You maybe knew like 1 or 2 or 5 people,
especially region to region.
You didn't know 20. Yeah. And so it's a risk, right? To go, I'm going to go to this place. But the fundamental kind of codifying ideas of the group creates an environment where if I know that these people passed all the filters, which is they had to be interested enough to go on Meetup and find something. They had to be interested enough to go to a random group where people are talking about a topic like abortion. They stuck it out, and now they have the, audacity to give him or me some of their money to now go to a foreign country and spend a week with us, where we did most of the planning, and it might be wild.
It's like Fire Festival all over again.
But it could be, right? It could be.
But all of them got along despite divergent opinions.
Right.
Because like our conversation we just had, and even on the internet conversation, we had 3 separate opinions. Yet we're still friends, right? We're still amiable.
Well, for a few more minutes, and
for
then,
a few,
then
yeah,
you're out.
Then I'll put my middle finger
We're
at you.
trespassed off the property.
But it's interesting when you start doing this, you kind of self-filter the people who are too partisan and that are too they put too much moral implication on your opinions, and it self-filters into a group who can entertain thoughts.
And that's the funnest group to hang out with.
Yeah, I wonder if our topic on abortion would be different if we had 3 women here. I wonder if it would be even more different if one of those 3 women had actually gone through an abortion, right? The conversation would change, and it's but
that would have been very interesting.
Very interesting, and I would love, and honestly, if I were to present that topic, I would want that kind of diversity,
100%.
But at the same time, I also,
if I'm going to take, by the way, the reason I picked it.
Yeah.
Because you all are guys. That's useful. It's useful to watch men stumble through a conversation they're not supposed to have a conversation about.
Yeah.
Right.
But I also, if we went to Ibiza or took a group of 24, we're going to do 36 to Malta this summer.
36 in Malta.
36 to Malta in 5 different regions.
How are you picking these numbers?
We just kept expanding. We got third villa.
There is some calculus to it. So a denominator of 12 works really well for houses. Usually villas you can find, there'll be 6 bedrooms, 12 people. That usually tends to be pretty, it tends to flow across even countries and stuff.
Are they similar demographic where they're mostly single?
That's probably the only major dominant force, is not having huge family obligations. Being able to go for 8 days to that's probably the one diversity factor we don't have, is suburb multi-kid families.
Yeah.
People.
Just because of time, probably.
Yeah.
But no, we have
I don't know how you solve that exactly.
couples and married folks come on these trips. We try to do, I think we actually have more diversity in that regard on the trips than we do in regular sessions. And that comes from logistics, because a lot of these houses, you'll have half of them will have 2 single beds.
They got to be comfortable
double bed
in the same room. But I would say to finish my statement on that was even if we had the 3 women or the one woman who had been through an abortion, had an emotional lock to this topic, I think that the people that we would bring on a trip to 36 people to Malta, I think the one thing that really solidifies all of us is they would all be okay with us having a simple conversation about abortion. There are a group of people out there that will listen to this and say, these 3 men should not have had that conversation.
Yeah, sure.
Right.
I don't.
But those
want to
people don't come to
associate with
thinkers
them.
usually.
I do not want to associate with the people who say we're not allowed to have that conversation. We did plenty of caveats that said we're men. We get it.
We shouldn't have even had to do, right? But we understand the audience.
But we understand what we're saying.
I think that the reason I chose to do it was my choice.
Yeah.
I didn't have to do that.
Yeah.
I'm a little worried that people are going to assume I didn't know that was a thing one should do.
Right.
Not because I actually give a shit about doing it.
But they'll turn you off.
They'll assume that I am walking into this blindly, like I'm an idiot off the street, and that's just not true.
Yeah. It is for me. I'm an idiot. Walked off the street.
I met him 20 years ago. He's an idiot.
You were in the parking lot. You weren't on the street. But yes. I didn't hear some random person. I'm a bit worried if we just say, here's a bunch of dudes who showed up. I'm a bit worried about that.
Yeah.
This isn't a bit of...
This was planned.
This was planned, but you didn't know what I was planning.
I did not know what topic you were going to bring up.
And I chose it because it isn't supposed to be you. It isn't supposed to be you in this room. So you're sidelined. You're like, I'm not allowed to be in this conversation. I'm not supposed to have an opinion. And yet you have to have an opinion. You've got to.
Yeah.
Everyone has to have an opinion. They don't have to.
Because we're all voters. We're going to vote.
They don't have to talk about their opinion. But they have to have one anyway because they're humans. Humans all have opinions on something. They don't want to necessarily position themselves on a side or another. I think I land slightly left on this particular issue, even though I think politically I'm maybe slightly right, which just shows that I'm probably centrist in most ways. But this
I think
one,
people are more dynamic than people think.
but on a per issue basis, I would say on this one I'm definitely more on the left, but not wildly left.
Right.
More like, I just can't get over that smoking problem.
Yep.
I can't get over the fact that I really want to rip the crap out of that cigarette. Like, what are you doing? Why are you doing this to your future child? And so I think that the utility in this conversation is there's going to be a wide variety of conversations, like all over the place.
Yeah.
You're going to have disparate views. And you have to deal with these people who maybe are actually wrong think, and you have to convince them sort of, but you're not going to do that. You guys have chosen, like, we're not going to do that. We're not going to have a podium. We're not going to get up on a high horse. And yet you are probably more educated than most of the people in the room on whatever topic you thought of, because it's something you're thinking about. You guys have done a little bit of that work.
Yeah.
You maybe not have done the deep work. You're not a PhD in blah blah blah, whatever it is. But when I look at guys like you, I'm like, well, those guys are putting in the effort. They're really trying to make their brains work for the knowledge, and most of the people in the room are probably not doing that.
Yeah.
Maybe they should be doing that, and that's why they're there. They're like, okay, I need to get a workout. This is the gym for me. Like, this is my this is my heavy workout for the week.
Yep. This is why we've been doing this for fucking 9 years. We keep doing it because
it's been that long. 9 years.
We started in 2014.
Oh, I didn't.
Whatever. How many years that is?
September 10th, 2014. So it'll be 10 years in September.
Yeah.
I didn't realize it was that long. I guess you said that, but I also was picturing that as being the startup that doesn't really exist years. But
No, this was, I mean, it certainly was weird in the beginning. Like, we would have 4 or 5 people show up. And
It
that was
evolved
for 6 months or so. And then it really hit a stride. And it, like you said, it went from 6 to 10 to 12 to 15 to 20. Now they're like, you can't come to this restaurant anymore. We can't have you here. You're taking the whole restaurant, and it's thrash.
I will say we're almost at our 10-year anniversary, and I am more engaged with this right now than I was ever. And I'm like, I just started a Burning Man camp called Camp Parlay. Parlays. We're gonna fly the flag of truce at this 80,000 person weird ass city in Nevada, and we're gonna have a conversation camp where people can come and have these conversations.
Do you have like a massive flagpole?
Big flagpole,
It's gonna
white
be like
flag,
bigger than
It's gonna
everyone
say
else's
parlay.
flag. Just bigger than everyone else's
Yeah,
flagpole.
and we just want parlay with us. Come talk.
Yep.
Come talk.
The white flag.
We're gonna do this summer, and it's just an experiment.
Should get it even bigger than everyone else's flag.
It's gonna be the big flag.
Just look for the giant white flag. We don't have
It's not a
anywhere
white
for you to
supremacist
sleep,
flag.
but
It
we have
says
a
parlay.
Yeah.
You might want to get some civil engineers in there ahead of time to like really bolt this down.
There's a lot of wind there, but this is an idea worth spreading. People should have these conversations.
Can't
we
use
should be
that. That's
allowed to have these conversations.
That's copyrighted by TED Talks. You can't say that.
Wait, what?
Strike that
What's-
from the record.
Oh,
Ideas worth spreading.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it's a TED Talk.
Copyrighted?
I'm
Is that
imagine
copyrighted?
trademarked.
Oh, geez.
I'm not a federal lawyer.
They suck.
I do. So I have a little vignette that I would like to kind of.
Yeah.
So you asked earlier, like, what was it? Or I don't remember what it was, but there was a conversation we had about, well, how did you know this was a thing that was actually worth having? So we had the first storytellers I ever did was at a place in San Antonio called 1919. And we just kind of moved the tables around and had like a tall stool that somebody sat on at the front. And the overarching topic was sex, drugs, and rock and roll. My objective was everybody's going to come with a funny story about how they got hammered and did something stupid. And that was basically what happened. So maybe 10, 15 people told a story. And then we took a break and we came back in. And we were still pretty new. This is probably maybe a year into it. So late, maybe early 2015, mid 2015. So there was a woman that came in. She's like, had not been there before. And everybody else had told these crazy stories, like, I got, passed out and got run over by a car or whatever the craziness is. She gets up there and her story starts that way. And it's like, it's a college party, da-da-da. And then little by little, we realized she's telling us about how she was raped, right, at this party. And the mood certainly got very, like, serious. And we're all sitting there, and everybody's quiet and listening. And she tells her story, and she kind of closes it out at the end with whatever kind of lesson or whatever it was that she was trying to get. But then she came up to me afterwards, and I was like, "Hey, I appreciate you, being vulnerable and telling that story. I think it takes a lot of bravery." She's like, "That's the first time I ever told that story." And I was like, "Really? Like, why did you do it here?" And she's like, "This gave me autonomy, or not autonomy. What's the word I'm looking for? When you're anonymous, anonymity. There we go. This gave me the anonymity that I don't know any of these people. I don't owe them anything, but it was." Everybody felt like they were in the space and people could share.
The consequences were suppressed on what could possibly happen if you brought it up.
Right. And so she shared that story and she never came back. But when she came afterwards and thanked me for creating the space where that was capable, like being able to do that, I was like, well, I guess this is bigger than us now. And that was kind of when I realized this has to continue. And
it's always been bigger. Yeah. Every time me and Ian have thought, I'm tired, I don't want to show up on Tuesday anymore.
Which happens about every Monday at about 6 p.m. as I'm about to drive to downtown.
We keep coming back because it is bigger than us.
And it's epic. Like you'll see people going through epiphanies and life. Like, yeah, it's awesome.
So I think back to the question I asked, why does this work? Why did what we just did work?
I think part of it is drinking. So here's a beer for you.
It's because I haven't had enough.
I mean, why does it work? I think number one, people are looking for it. Number two, I don't think there's a great venue of opportunities to do it. That become apparent to me. And number three is, the format matters and the clients, the people that show up matter.
For me, I think one of the reasons it works is because we're so welcoming. So this idea that if I have a topic on blockchain and cryptocurrency, that someone who works at a flower shop, are they allowed to have an opinion and contribute to this discussion? Yes. And thinkers and drinkers, I want your opinion. How will it affect you if our currency changes? Even though you're not an expert.
As an aside, this is an aside, but it's relevant. Yeah. Imagine I was a shopkeeper. It could be a flower shop or a grocer or whatever, and I had to wait an hour to transact because Bitcoin takes an hour.
Yeah.
Is everyone cool with that? Is that what we're doing?
I would say likely not.
Should this non-expert's opinion influence policy? Yes. Should they decide a policy as a non-expert? Maybe no.
Yeah, right. So
should three men talk about abortion or decide policy? No. Should we influence? Should we be allowed to have this conversation? Yes.
Find me a policymaker that's an actual expert on what they're making policy about.
Right.
I think that's the answer. I think that's the answer to your question. There is on the policy piece, but no, I think everybody should feel. I imagine that one of my favorite topics was vulnerability because I think that's what the group is about.
What was the question?
That was the topic, right?
Yeah. What was the question? What was the?
Why this works?
No. What was the? Just vulnerability is the
we choose very broad topics and then we ask questions.
Yeah, but was there
it.
a question in the thing or just vulnerability was the topic?
Usually we'll start out, but so when I post a topic, I'll say topic is vulnerability, and then I'll ask one or two like prompting questions in the description.
Give me one of them.
Do you feel that you are vulnerable in a day-to-day basis? And then what does that mean, right? What because some people will, and I'll leave it specifically broad, and because I'm more interested in how people interpret the question versus how they answer the question. So if I say, do you find yourself to be vulnerable? If I'm a 5'2" woman who is petite, 112 pounds, they may interpret that question differently than me or Chris. Well, let's use Chris because he's a larger human than me.
I'm huge.
But he may say, "Oh yeah, like what he's asking me in this prompt is, am I vulnerable? Do I let my feelings come out?" Whereas the woman may say, "I feel vulnerable and walk home in a dark alley." Those two interpretations are much different questions, and I specifically leave them pretty broad because I'm very interested in both those conversations.
I do the same thing because I will often be asked, like, can we define the word vulnerability? I'm
Absolutely
like, no,
not.
No,
That's
we're
always
drinking.
I mean, you could for some caveat
Yes.
statement.
There are certain things where we go, let's define what we're talking about right now for this context. But when we ask a question, it's like, do you feel on a day-to-day, do you feel vulnerable? And a man says, I feel guarded. I don't like my opinion being shared. I'm stoic. And a woman says, I feel vulnerable because I'm always under attack. Those are two contexts.
yeah.
So I've had a lot of death threats.
You have. I know this.
So I feel very much all of that spectrum of vulnerability.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, I've had a lot of really terrible things happen.
Yeah.
So vulnerability in a spectrum of bad guys doing bad things. Yeah, I feel all of those things. Yeah. But I can see why somebody might say, "Well, no, I'm not. I'm attacked because of an opinion." Is a very different thing than attacked because I'm a human.
Yeah.
Right.
Your life being under threat versus someone might have a negative opinion of you.
If you're Jewish, for instance, right now, a friend of a friend, she's about to go and testify for something. She's the only sort of centrist Jewish person who's going to commit any sort of testimony that day. She's like, am I going to die? Like, I just don't know who's going to come and find me that day to say it's like, I believe that Israel should exist.
Right.
Because that's a controversial opinion.
Right.
Amongst a huge, in her particular world, the vast majority of people don't agree with her.
Right.
Fuck.
But so going back to the vulnerability thing,
Mm-hmm.
to me, that is one of the core competencies. And that's what I talked about in my story, is that for us, we're opening a space for people to be vulnerable, whatever that vulnerability means to that person, and share their insight and share their anecdotal life experience. And I think as long as people are finding value in that to me, that's why I do it. Like, so that to give you like an underlying like business aspect, like, so we started this, it was just a thought and idea. And so it, from 2014 to 2018, that's all it was us spending our time and money to have this group, because Meetup costs money to be a host on there. Mm-hmm. It's per region per month. We have a website.
Is it expensive? Like,
it's not. No,
okay,
it's nominal. I think it's we got grandfathered.
What's that?
A couple $100 a month.
Okay.
I don't think it's even that much. We were grandfathered under their, because we had joined them pretty early. 2014 was pretty early. Mm-hmm. I want to say it's $15 per month per region. So if we have 5 regions, I'm not good at math. That's
They have offered us the Pro Tools, which we
like
have not
$70 a
accepted
month.
yet.
if you upgrade to the Pro Tools, which would take us out of the grandfather and put us under, it'd be like more like $35, $45 a month per region per month. Gives you stats and you can gather strip emails and stuff like that and communicate with people, and I don't care. But so for the first part of it, it was us just burying our money and our time into this thing that we found valuable, because we were meeting amazing people and we're doing this cool stuff, and everybody's like, we rented a campground. This is the first like big trip that we did. There's a campground between San Antonio and Austin here on Canyon Lake. There's like a county campground, and you can rent a pavilion there. It's $75 a night, at least it was in 2016, and you can camp just camp there for free. You just rent the pavilion, and you can have up to 100 people there. There's parking, and it's
we did.
And we did not do 100. I think we did like 50 people.
Okay.
And I was like, this is so much fun. Like, it's way more fun. And people really respond to that, because these are like big things. Like, this is kind of like big thinking, like, Fire Festival. It could be terrible, but if it goes okay, everybody's like, this is amazing.
Terrible. Yeah. People sold
Still
out
remember
the
it.
next one.
Yeah.
Let's not compare Thinkers and Drinkers to Fire Festival.
We're going to do it one more
To
time.
be
at
fair,
least
Chris is
tonight.
100% responsible for the Burning Man thing this year.
Yeah. It's going to be great.
But because we have this big sky thinking, and we were like, well, if this is possible, why not? So we kept doing that. And then the Ibiza trip, we're like, okay, we're about to rent a house. I think it was $8,500 euros for the house in Ibiza for the first one. And then we doubled up, so we got 2 of those. So that's 17,000 euros.
Someone's Amex took that.
And we were like, well, that's a lot of money. And that's like starting to feel like liability is a thing we should probably start worrying about. Mm-hmm. So we spun up an LLC and put this under an LLC and do all the transactions.
Made it a nonprofit.
And then we went and got 501c7 status because I think that was important to me. Chris was like, we don't need to do that. I was like, I think that says what we are. I think if people think, oh, this is a company that's trying to make money, it takes a little bit of the flavor off of it. And it was important to me to do the 501c7 because literally that's what it is. Like
What is
nobody.
Nonprofit.
It's a nonprofit club.
Club.
It's club.
So a normal 501c3 is
any
your normal
dollars we collect have to be to the benefit of the membership.
benefit of the membership.
Mm-hmm.
We can't take outside investment.
15,000 members in Thinkers and Drinkers across all of our regions.
Mm-hmm.
Not all of them are active.
How many?
but
1,500?
15,000.
15,000.
Not all of them are active, but
How do you
that's
measure
just
that?
our meetup app. The people who have joined the group, the people who have joined the group is 15,000. The people who are active is a smaller number. So sometimes we quote the number of actives we have per region, and sometimes we quote the membership per region. And it's always different. It's like how much reach do we have? How many people do we have show up?
Yeah. So, once we made it like official, it kind of gave us, okay, well, where can we take this? And so for me, it was important to do those things because I think it gives us validity to the point where people are like, it's a real thing. It's not just these 2 dudes, doing whatever. It is a real thing. And it gave us
It was kind of just 2 dudes.
it was just 2 dudes doing random shit. But for me, it was like, okay, this is a real thing and we're doing like big real things. So the biggest one we ever did, I took, I think
75 people to Moab.
75 people on a camping trip to Moab. Rented a campground on the Colorado River in Moab.
All people who
For a week.
believe these rules, have practiced them, wanted to discuss things, and we had amazing conversations.
Hired a guy to come out and play. So I'm doing it again this year. I didn't get the big campground though, so I only can take 35 people. But I'm flying a guy out from Atlanta to come and play a set while we're at the campground, because why not? Mm-hmm. We call it Electric Aspens. Every year we do a trip. This is a little bit smaller just because of the constraints of the space. But we do a camping trip. It's out in the National Forest in Colorado. You need 4x4 high clearance vehicle to get there. We flew a DJ from Austin to the top of the friggin' mountain.
10,500 feet.
And we played a set in this old abandoned hunting cabin, which is about maybe 10% larger than this room we're in.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
Dirt floor. Mm-hmm. We need a generator. There's no power. There's no infrastructure. We need a generator, speakers. We have more lasers per square foot in that place, I think, than has ever been seen in a national forest. Let's be real.
But we just create...
For those watching, this is about 10,000 square foot stage here.
We
so.
keep we keep creating these opportunities to get the people who love this format and love talking about these things, and we get them together and we have fun. We're thinkers and drinkers. One of my facilitation tips and my facilitator's guide that Ian and I we've been contributing to for the past few years, and we're trying to like publish more. We put in these facilitation tips, and one of them is like, we're not that formal. We don't need to be.
Yeah.
We're drinking.
I'm on vacation too.
I'm on vacation too. We are trying to have good conversations among people that we want to have conversations with, and it's also part of our social outlet. And so we can have these conversations while having a few drinks. We can have these conversations while being at a festival or having a concert at the end of the night. And we want to incorporate deeper conversations in all of our social endeavors.
It just becomes an everyday thing.
Every social endeavor that me and Ian do, we incorporate some deeper thing.
So, latest example, I had a house. I just moved house in Colorado. and I threw a housewarming party because that's what you do.
Of course.
And I posted on the meetup, and it was terrible weather. It was like a blizzard in Colorado. I still had 30 people show up to the house, which is wild. To have, and some of them are strangers, never met them before, literally ever. That's the other thing about Thinkers that I find really interesting is you post different events, it'll draw different crowds. And so like these people never come to the regular one. I had these 2 random women who just show up to this random house party and got in Castle Rock, Colorado, like way out on the burbs. And I'm like, hey, like this is awesome. Welcome. And it's great because I have like a loft area at the top of the house, and we all went up there, and I had someone gave me these, they're called like intimacy cards. And they're supposed to be between a couple, like after the honeymoon phase is over, you ask yourself these intimacy questions, like, what attributes of your father do you not like, and what do you see in yourself? That kind of like deeper question. And literally everybody's up there, and I just like, oh, and I grab them, and 30 people are sitting upstairs in the house, and I'm like, all right, hey, first question, and I ask the first question, and just go around the whole. This is at a house party. Everybody's hammered, like wildly hammered, but we ask these questions, and then we kind of go do the other, like just go back to partying. But always there's always I think one of the qualifying things about being at a Thinkers event is there is always a measure of intentionality that we implement that makes people feel like, this is a real thing. This isn't just I show up and I make my own conversation. There's an intention here, which people recognize and they appreciate.
Okay, so I'm going to ask the same question I asked at the very beginning.
Go.
What do you guys get out of this? You guys started this thing. You wanted to do this thing. Mm-hmm. What do you get out of it? What is your upside out of talking to these people and
I've been asked this question a lot.
Yeah, but
can I tell you what we don't get first?
Sure.
We don't make any money from this.
We do not make any money from this.
So literally, like I know, so underlying, you can pay yourself a salary from a 501c whatever. We do not. We do it completely free, and
sure,
the money completely all goes back into the organization.
Yeah, but why do it?
I just wanted to like lay that out there because some people be like, yeah, you're saying all these lovely things that you get out of it.
To me, it's honestly my therapy.
Honestly, I at least know your background. This is not how you make $1 million.
No, it's not.
No,
it's not.
So why are you doing it? And what do you get out of it?
I think on the day-to-day sustainment, it is a little bit of my therapy, being able to talk about deep topics that I don't get to talk about normally, because humanity, you asked the question, the first topic you brought up was easy. Is the internet good?
I don't think that's easy.
And the funny thing is that
light. I said
it's light. It's light. Is
certainly than the second topic.
It's very easy for social interaction and interaction on the internet to be surface level, and it's hard to go deep. And Thinkers and Drinkers gives us an opportunity to go deep.
If you want to, yeah.
If you want to,
and you guys want to,
and we want
100%.
To.
Why?
I need it.
Why?
Are we doing the 7 whys? Why?
No, I mean, you're saying strong things right now.
Yeah, I alluded to it earlier. I think that the way we communicate ultimately in today's world is not what satisfies the itch of actually communicating. And so for me, being able to look somebody in the eyes and talk about something that actually matters, even if we're not going to solve any world problems, like literally, I don't think any of the people that come to this group are in a position to go and take what they learn in this room and go like make policy that, makes people's lives better. We're all just regular humans having a drink, whatever. I'm sure there's been to like some well-to-dos that came to the group and maybe learned something, but did it affect them in a way that I think that the world became a better place? No, it's not my objective. My objective is to be able to give people a space, myself included, to get the thoughts and ideas that are in our head that we think about. Personally, I think about shit all the time. I'm just grinding through stuff. And I agree with him. This is my therapy. Like, I don't go to therapy. I did for a while. And now I don't feel like I have to, because anything that I feel like talking about, number one, I get to pick the topic. So guess what you were all doing? You're in my group therapy session.
His
Today we're talking about online dating. Let's talk about why Ian's dates all fail. But that's the power of being the facilitator, is you can say, what's been really bothering me is like, why do we have to care so much about Israel right now? or whatever the new thing is that's happening, you can throw it out there and people will give you their feedback and you can learn and feel, and then you can go home and sleep.
My answer is different.
Okay.
And we actually had a fight about this. We didn't have a fight.
Who wants to take over the world?
But we did have a drunken conversation about this, because at one point he was like, at one point I'm going to give all this up. I'm going to get a family. I'm going to find someone I love, and I'm going to stop thinking.
I don't think I said that
with random people. He didn't say that exactly.
I said the first part, not the second part.
But it gave me the impression that he would
fall in love every night.
Yeah. It gave me the impression that he was in the mindset that one day he would find a family, settle down, and he would stop thinking and drinking with random people.
Okay.
And I said, I will never stop. Because for me, I'm an entrepreneur, and everything I do, I try to put in the context of, does this make a difference and impact in the world? And I'm like, thinkers and drinkers, the thing we created does. Because the problem in this world today is that we don't talk to each other. We just want to fight. And the problem in our country today is that we don't talk to each other. We just want to fight. And thinkers and drinkers is a model that we are bridging gaps. We are taking people who disagree with each other and making it possible and a container for them to talk to each other. And I think that's a thing worth keep doing. Mm-hmm. And so we had this we were a drunken fight while I was like sick as fuck over Thanksgiving.
In Montana.
Yeah. And maybe I got to you because you were like, all right, Chris, yeah, let's go publish this thing and spread. Let's go to DC. And we opened up DC. Mm-hmm. And 24, 30 people showed up to our first DC meeting and loved it.
I could see that being a market that
would 100%.
Yeah.
It's going to get huge. Yeah.
And that was just two people. One person, Bobby from Austin,
them,
Robin
LA,
from
San Francisco. There's a few.
Yeah, they moved out there and they said, we miss it. We want it.
Do it here.
Started it. Mm-hmm. And it was fucking successful.
Yeah. But for the record, just to set the record straight here, this guy over here, I never said I was going to go start a family or anything like that.
No, he didn't say that.
What I did say was that this is my focus would not be on legacy. Like, I'm not doing this to create something in it for it to go out and live and breathe on its own. The moment I don't find value in this, I'm not going to do it anymore. Mm-hmm. And if it just turns off, I'm okay with that. That doesn't bother me. I think it bothers him. But for the record, anytime this guy gets in a serious relationship, he wanders off and does some weird shit, which is where the foot fetish thing came in. Because he turned it over to one of his exes or whatever, and she starts doing this crazy stuff. And I'm like,
I feel like there's a backstory to this foot fetish thing.
We need a whole other podcast.
A whole nother podcast. That's a topic for another night.
Okay, so how do you feel like this enables other people to do what you're doing? Like, so you are growing out.
Yeah.
There's a whole bunch of people who are kind of following your footsteps.
Yep.
Are they presidents in these different regions? How do you refer to these people?
Organizationally, we have facilitators. So even like so Ian stepped down from head of Denver. So Nathan is the head of Denver.
So these facilitators, they go propagate forward the thing.
Yeah.
What do you hope happens with the group?
Just the same thing. Create space for people to be.
Yeah, but specifically, what do you want to happen?
I think there's two things. One, we had this facilitator meeting. We brought all the facilitators together in December, and we came out to this random ass cabin in a small town in Colorado.
Super fun.
Like, how do you measure this?
Yeah. So what we measured on two factors. One, is Thinkers and Drinkers parlay, the formats, the rules, the ethos of what we've created, is that an idea worth spreading? And we all said yes. Is this a community we can manage?
You said it because it was the right thing to say. You actually felt it, or it was like, I'll say yes now.
No. It's an idea worth spreading.
How do you? Okay, all right.
Like we should spread this kind of thing. Like for me, when I'm like, I've been pushing parlay among the group as this idea of like, how do we manage controversy? How do we manage controversy? Mm-hmm. Let's create a format that's non-debate specific, because when I debate, when I go on Google and say, how do I talk about controversial opinions among people, I find a bunch of debate tips on how to win an argument. And I'm like, no. Where the fuck are all the tips on how to have a decent conversation among three friends that disagree? There's none. There's none.
Is that something you feel like you could produce?
Yeah.
Maybe.
I'm not
Like
the expert.
here's a. So I've read this document for
Yeah.
not this one, the one under this one, the longer version of the same thing.
Mm.
Is there a way you could make this more public? Like, here's how to have this kind of debate. Here's how to have this kind of conversation. Like,
The fundamental thing is, how does one have a conversation about a divisive topic that doesn't devolve into a debate fight? And we have found in our 9 years that we can have fundamental great conversations about potentially divisive topics where it doesn't devolve into a shitty debate about who wins.
And it's fun. There's some
And
special
want-
sauce in
for
there.
I
sure.
want to spread it. I want to spread it. I want to make a game of it. I want to publish it. I want to push it out.
okay, all right. So how do we do that? What's the next steps?
I said, "Hey man, you need to get us on the most popular podcast in Austin." And he
And I said, the Arsenic Show.
And I was like, it's probably second at least. And then, so here's my thing, right? I don't know how that happens, right? We've had this conversation that was the whole like knockout drag out in Montana was how do we go from where we are? And without me quitting my full-time job and doing an entire other full-time job, bridge the gap between this being kind of an idea that's really fun and we all just go out and have a good time to where it's actually repeatable and we can scale it,
Sustainable.
sustain it. How do we, because money makes everything work, right? So how do you monetize it in a way that, for me, the biggest part of that is how do you not take the flavor away?
Yeah, but not monetization in the sense that you profit off of it.
No, we don't care. That it can
organization
continue
grows.
and live and breathe on its own.
It's self-sustaining.
Yeah.
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 Sure.
Yeah. So that was, but for me, it's about not losing the flavor, right? Because like I said, the organizers have kind of like this carte blanche to go forth, and I've done a little bit of like anytime I travel, I'm in San Antonio, I'll stop by and visit the group, and it feels and looks a lot like I would want it to. And that's reassuring that it kind of goes, and we've instated the culture, and it lives and it breathes and it moves out, and we don't have to like babysit it. And that's essential because I don't have the time or the bandwidth to do that. But what I worry about is there are some like, we've had organizers that did, like you need to join my team, and this is a group where we talk about why my team is right and your team is wrong. That's not great. That's not what we want. There's a lot of vibes like Robin. I love Robin to death, but she's just like wild. And so she attracts wild people, and they had wild shit happen to them. Like San Antonio, like Robin hits me up. She's like, we were sitting out on the patio at this place and people were throwing bricks at us. And I'm like, what in the hell are you doing out there?
Literal bricks?
Literal bricks, like cinder blocks that were sitting on the curb. They got thrown at them. And I was like, what are you doing? Like, she's just wild. And I think wild things attract to her. It'll be interesting
love
to
Robin,
see.
by the way.
Dude, I like literally like my spirit animal, 100%. But you have these things where, like Gordon runs Portland. He is this, like super thoughtful, super conscientious. He's older than us by a fair bit, but he still parties, still does fucking hero doses of mushrooms and goes to electro shows. And
He's like 50.
yeah, his vibe is going to be different than mine, and I have to be okay with that. What are the core flavors that I need to carry out and be projected into this community, no matter how far away from me and him it gets? That's the thing. Am I okay with it being like a foot fetish group where they just get together and talk about?
The answer was no.
Bring this back. I feel like I'm going to hear this story.
It's a tough problem to solve. We have talked
So-
about it. I'm not sold. He says it's possible. I'm not sold. I'm okay with it completely dying when I'm no longer interested in it.
But have you ever Googled how to have a controversial conversation that doesn't turn into debate? It's always debate.
Yeah,
yes,
'cause-
but debate has a value.
It does.
right.
It does.
But we all
really
don't
does.
need to be Ben Shapiro.
But that's
like, I don't need
that's
to own you.
a format.
It's a format, and the nice part about that format, I actually like the Socratic method. I've always liked it, but it involves It involves tough people having hard conversations that are okay being completely, totally wrong amongst their peers.
Right.
Because if that works, then it all works.
Right.
Because I'm like, I'm okay. If I'm wrong, if you're like, you're completely wrong about the internet is totally virtuous, and I'm like, I figured out, and this happened here. I'm like, oh, great, cool, awesome, great. We're all on the same page, and I was wrong, and it's amazing. I learned something.
Yep.
A lot of people are not okay with that.
Yeah.
They're like, nope, I can't be wrong in public setting. I'm sorry, it's not going to work.
Or even not wrong, but disagreed with.
Well, maybe okay, disagreed with, but at minimum stalemate, right?
Right.
Like,
But what I mean is there's been a lot of what I've seen lately is that you're not even allowed to say things that are literally true because they're not in.
can you give me an example?
It's like, guys.
I think like the vaccination thing, right? Like I feel like I should have a healthy amount of skepticism about big pharma putting things in my arm 8 months after we have this virus kind of sweep around. I think that skepticism should be acceptable, right? I think we've all learned that there's a perverse incentive system in this, in how we do things. Why should I not be like able to say out loud, I have some objections about putting things in my arm.
Well, I think the word perfectly safe is how you know that people are not looking at this.
Because there's no such thing as perfectly
Because
safe.
like if I miss a vein, is that perfectly safe?
Right.
No, it's not. You injected something horrible into a thing that isn't meant to accept
If the
thing.
disease turns 50% of us into zombies and the vaccine turns 10% of us into vegetables,
Wow.
we would have a conversation about that, right?
Sure, and the other extreme, yes.
Right.
But a real thing is just like, what if I miss a vein?
Right. No. But my thing is,
what if I'm allergic to anything in it?
Right.
It doesn't matter what the actual drug is. Anything in it.
But the conversation was not allowed to be had. And that was
Perfectly safe.
That was what I was worried about, because I brought that up as a thinker's topic. Like I said before, I brought the guy who I knew was like, I'm not on board with this. And it was literally like,
and not to say
early 2021.
And not to say, and I won't project an opinion one way or another, but not to say that it is not ultimately good or ultimately terrifyingly terrible in what some draconian we turn into zombies, to your point. But it's not perfectly safe.
Right. And we're allowed to have a conversation about what my thoughts are on it.
And what does that middle ground of perfectly safe look like? There's no room at all for anything going wrong ever, for anybody to be allergic to any version of anything related to this. Have you checked it enough population to make sure that 0.01% hasn't had some
Adverse, right.
something?
So my biggest thing is
That means it's not perfectly safe.
right. For me, the idea that it was unacceptable, like I was like, this is all thinkers people. I know this group. I've been here for 2 years at this point.
Very open group.
Like we're all coming here knowing we're going to disagree with each other. That was the most heated topic I've ever hosted in 10 years.
Okay, so to round that out.
Yep.
Imagine something isn't perfectly safe. Not saying it isn't.
As many
or
things
isn't
are.
perfectly safe. Can we have a conversation around, okay, so then where do we land? Like not saying that it is or is not. I'm not saying it is. I'm not saying it's not.
I feel like you're tiptoeing around a little bit here.
No. I'm saying what happens if it isn't.
Right.
And I think that's the thought piece
Yes.
you add to the conversation. Like, well, what if it turns out it's like 0.00001%?
Regardless of what
safe?
that is, we should have a place where we can at least have a
So
conversation.
then it isn't perfectly safe. Yeah. So then what?
Yeah.
Like, how do we have a conversation around it?
Man, I mean, like I have already,
How is that
I have already
controversial?
written down like 6 different topics worth having from this conversation.
So, okay. Gentlemen, we're way over our time.
Yes.
I really, really appreciate you guys doing this. I liked the idea of having these kind of conversations. I like the fact we had a couple of them. I like the fact that they were both controversial, despite the fact I didn't think the first one would be.
Right.
I didn't. I think you guys would land on one side and be done, and we could just move on. So I would advocate people try this. How do people do it? How do people get involved?
6 regions?
5 regions.
5 regions.
Portland, San Antonio, Austin, Denver, and now DC.
DC.
The
weekly meetings.
What happened to Stuttgart?
We had Stuttgart and Berlin, but the pandemic kind of killed it.
Yeah, they never really started back, and it really was the organizers. They weren't interested in doing the hard work anymore. Which
we called it Thinkers and Drinkers International because we had Germany.
Yeah,
and then because Germany took so long to get normalized from the pandemic that the group that came back had never done it before, and it lost its flavor.
Yeah,
even if there were people who wanted to do it, they hadn't done it before because it's been years.
So, how do people do it? I mean, if they're in those locations, they can definitely join the group.
How?
You can find us on Meetup. So Meetup app.
Thinkers and Drinkers.
And then we have a website, thinkersanddrinkers.international. That's where we keep, it's like the collection point for all of our information. We have photos from previous trips. Has all the links to all the different regions and their meetup groups. And then we have the link for the podcast on there as well, so people can listen in.
What's the name of it?
Thinkers and Drinkers podcast.
Okay, cool.
Yep.
And is it on like Spotify?
It's pushed out through all of them, so
cool.
any podcatcher can get it, and Spotify as well. And
check that out.
And 2 things we're trying to push the idea.
Yeah,
I'm publishing the rules that we've been practicing and trying to refine, and the facilitator's guide. The idea is worth spreading. If you want to have one in your region, and we can't control it, so the idea is worth spreading. Go and take our facilitator's guide and our rules. You can have it. If the community takes more intense effort from us. And so to be a full-fledged member of the Thinkers and Drinkers community, we just started DC, and someone from New York says, I want to start it too. That is more effort than just taking our rules and just go doing it.
And I've been telling people now.
But like community, we are vested in every community we open. We want, if I go to DC, I want the same experience I have in Austin and Denver. To see people experiencing these rules, to experience people having these type of open conversations, and it not being a partisan fight or a totally like they have their own zeitgeist and their own Overton window of what's acceptable.
And ultimately what that means is that whoever's doing that, because we've had plenty of requests like, hey, I want to start in Minneapolis, like start a group. I just tell people no, because if I don't know you, I have no idea what you're going to do. And I'm not going to give you the Coca-Cola syrup for you to go make Shasta, like this to me, the brand value of the name is that when you go to DC and you go to Thinkers, you're going to have a very similar experience to where, and because we've completely vetted those people, we know them very well. Yep. The organizers in all these regions, they're either people we've known for years and have been Thinkers for years, and we know they're the right type of person to go and project that into the world. We're not going to let random people just be like, oh, Thinkers and Drinkers. Like there's a place that they always say replication is the highest form of flattery or whatever that saying is. There's a group in Denver called Vino and Viewpoints. What does that sound like? I don't know. And I was like,
have to drink wine.
Someone sent it.
You must.
Someone sent it to me on Meetup, and they're like, hey, like this looks a lot like Thinkers and Drinkers. They're like, interesting. And I just go and crash it. I get there, and this lady, she's like, oh my God, you're here. And I was like,
literally idolized him.
You're here.
Literally, I show up to this.
Specifically you.
Me, specifically Ian Perry, like shows up to this. I show up to this meetup called Vino and Viewpoints in Denver just to see what it was about, because I was like, these people are definitely like cramping our style, like copying our shit. And I show up, and she's like, oh my God, you're here. And I was like, well, yeah. She was like, I went to your meetup once, and I loved it so much. And then I couldn't get in because there was a wait list. And so I just started it myself. And cool, fine, don't mind.
Idea worth spreading.
Literally stands me up.
The community does take effort.
Stands me up in front of the whole place. It's like, this is the person that gave me the idea for this group. And she had a different format, and it was kind of stuffy. I didn't really like it personally. It didn't have the same flavor, but everybody has a different flavor, so I'm good with that.
Yeah, wine and cheese.
It just felt stuffy. Felt like these are all people that are kind of more introverted and need a very rigid experience, like the Toastmasters thing. I don't know if you've ever done that. It feels very rigid. It's like, here's a book, you must do X, Y, and Z, the rules, and then you go and you get the speech, and it is very robotic because I know how to do it.
I literally just talk to people.
Yeah.
So,
and that's more my style. I just like to fly from the seat of my pants.
Yeah.
Not everybody can do that, so I understand that. But for me, we don't trust anybody to kind of go out and do this. So if there's people that we trust, we protect the
ideas.
Brand.
We'll share.
Yeah, we'll share the ideas. Yeah. But we need somebody to look at this because the fonts are all weird. So.
Shut up.
And it's there's some misspellings.
Okay. URL, website, how you guys...
ThinkersandDrinkers.international.
International.
And go on Meetup and find Thinkers and Drinkers.
International is a TLD? Mm-hmm. Is that a real thing?
It is.
Thinkers, you can have anything you want. ThinkersandDrinkers.international.
Not anything I want. I'd pick very different things than you're thinking. Gentlemen, it's been a pleasure, brother.
Appreciate you having us on.
Yeah. It's
Thank
been
you.
Really fun.
Awesome.
Been good.
Thanks.